Winter in medieval times was long and cold, with no modern heating to keep homes warm. People lived through harsh weather using simple, practical methods passed down through generations. Their daily routines and careful habits helped them manage cold nights and limited resources. In small houses with rough walls, families used layers of clothing and animal skins to protect themselves from the chill. Fires were tended slowly, and the soft glow of lamps fueled by animal fats provided gentle light. Bedding made from straw and wool added warmth during sleep. Communities shared warmth and knowledge, supporting one another through the cold months. This quiet way of living was built on steady effort and close connection to the natural world. Exploring how these simple practices sustained people in difficult conditions reveals a calm and patient approach to survival in a time without modern comforts. Chapter 1. Introduce medieval winters lacking modern heating methods. During the long winters of the medieval period, the world was still and quiet. Cold air moved slowly through small villages, rushing over bare fields and frozen thatched roofs. There were no radiators or electric stoves, no hot water taps or insulated walls. The cold was constant, pressing in from all directions. Winters lasted months, with snow covering much of the land, and people had to adjust their lives around it. There were no shortcuts. They survived with the things they could find, the skills they had learned, and the strength of staying together. Homes were not built to keep heat in. Most village houses were made using simple timber frames filled with wattle and daub. The walls were uneven, sometimes with small gaps, and the roofs were made of straw or reeds. These houses were low and dark inside. Light entered only through small openings, which were often covered with animal skins or cloth. During the colder days, the floors were made of packed earth, sometimes scattered with straw or rushes to soften the chill. Inside, the air was cold and still. Most of the warmth came from the people who lived there and the fire they kept burning when they could. Clothing was a person's first defense against the cold. People wore many layers, and they used animal skins to trap warmth close to the body. These skins came from sheep, deer, or rabbits, and they were not treated in modern ways. They were stiff and heavy, but warm. The fur faced inward, and the outer side stayed rough. People wrapped these skins around their shoulders, their legs, and sometimes over their heads. They wore them while working, eating, and sleeping. The feeling of fur against the skin was familiar and calming. It was one of the few comforts during the long nights. Inside the house, the fire was small. There was usually a hearth in the center of the main room. It burned wood, dried dung, or straw. The smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, but much of it stayed inside. The room would fill with a soft haze, and the smell of burnt wood clung to everything. Lighting the fire each night was a quiet task. The embers from the day before were gathered and carefully placed in the center of the hearth. Dried twigs and moss were used to start the flame again. People moved slowly as they did this, careful not to waste materials. The crackle of fire was gentle, and the glow it gave off lit only a small circle. In the morning, if the fire had burned out, someone had to carry embers from another house. They did this using a clay or metal pot with a lid. The embers were covered in ash to keep them alive during the short walk. Once back home, they were placed into the hearth and slowly brought back to life. This method kept fires going across entire villages. It was quiet work. It was passed down from parent to child, and it was done with patience. Blankets were made from wool. They were thick and heavy. Some were roughly woven, others carefully stitched by hand. They held in the body's heat during sleep. At night, people lay close together on low beds or simple straw mats. They wrapped themselves in wool blankets, sometimes adding furs over the top. The weight of the blankets pressed down on their bodies, giving a feeling of safety. Movement was limited. People stayed still to conserve heat, their breath rising gently into the cold air. Clothing stayed on through the night. Boots, especially in colder regions, were lined with fur and kept on while indoors. These boots were made from animal hides, sometimes stitched with leather cords. They were not always comfortable, but they helped protect feet from the cold ground. Inside the home, walking was quiet and slow. People moved only when necessary. Most of the time was spent seated near the hearth, working or resting. Beds were made from bundles of straw or hay placed on wooden frames. These materials were gathered from nearby fields after harvest. The straw was dry and noisy under the blankets. It gave some lift from the earth and made the bed feel warmer. Sometimes, herbs were mixed in with the bedding to keep insects away. Lavender and mint gave off soft smells that filled the space around the bed. Replacing the bedding was done when it grew damp or too flat. It was a part of the weekly rhythm of life. Throughout the day, people kept warm by staying active. Tasks were simple but steady. Gathering wood, feeding animals, fetching water, and mending clothes required constant movement. Chores were done without hurry, but without rest. Body heat built naturally with work. Food was prepared slowly over the hearth. Cooking pots hung above the fire, and steam filled the room. Warm broth made from bones, herbs, and vegetables was common. It was served hot in wooden bowls. Drinking it brought heat into the chest and eased the chill in the hands. As the sun faded, people often gathered in small groups. They sat close together near the hearth, sharing warmth through body heat. Families, neighbors, and even animals were brought inside. Dogs and chickens might find spots near the walls. The closeness of others helped regulate warmth. There was little conversation. People listened to the fire, to the quiet outside, and to the breathing of those around them. Shared space was part of survival. Some homes were built with extra insulation, using dried reeds and moss pressed into the wall gaps. This helped slow the wind and hold heat longer. It was not perfect, but it made a small difference. These materials were collected in autumn and stored for winter repairs. Adding them to the walls was done by hand, pressing them into small cracks with simple tools. Under their wool garments, people wore linen shirts. Linen was cool but useful as a base layer. The combination of linen and wool gave the body a barrier from the cold. Layers were important. They were never removed fully until spring. Even at night, people slept in shirts and trousers. Scarves were wrapped around the neck, and sometimes cloths were tied over the head. When storms came, some families took shelter in cellars or small dugouts beneath the house. These underground spaces held steadier temperatures. The air was still and cold, but less biting than the wind above. Children often stayed down there, while adults checked the animals or tended the fire. In some cases, children were sent to sleep near the barn or inside animal shelters. The warmth from cows or pigs helped raise the temperature enough for rest. It was not comfortable, but it was known to work. The sounds of the animals were soft and familiar, breathing in the scent of hay and fur. The children often fell asleep quickly. At night, wool caps were worn tightly over the head. Heat escapes through the top of the body, so keeping the head warm was important. These caps were knitted or stitched by hand. They were passed down through families and patched many times. Wearing one was part of the nightly routine. Sometimes people heated stones in the fire and placed them beneath the bedding. The warmth lasted for hours. Stones were wrapped in cloth to prevent burns. This quiet practice made sleep easier. It was done slowly, with care, and brought a small comfort to the cold night. The fire had to be watched. If the coals went out, it was difficult to start again. Someone would stir the ashes and add a bit of wood before sleep. Others would check in the early morning, poking at the embers before sunrise. Lamps were fueled by animal fats, collected during butchering seasons. These fats were stored in clay pots and used sparingly. The lamps burned with a low orange light. They made a soft hiss and flicker. They were placed on shelves or near sleeping areas, glowing until the fuel ran out. Surviving the winter was not about comfort. It was about small, daily actions. layering clothes, tending fires, staying close to others, heating stones, eating warm food. These were the things people relied on. They lived through the cold in quiet ways, with steady hands and calm minds. Each winter was different, but their efforts were always the same: simple, shared, and slow. Chapter 2. Describe typical village houses, made from rough timber walls. People often imagine history as grand castles and wide stone halls. But most medieval life happened in small wooden homes, built by hand, with little more than tools made from iron and wood. These homes were not built for beauty or luxury. They were built for function, using the materials that were nearby and the knowledge passed down from generations. In the countryside, where most people lived, houses were made from timber frames, filled with sticks and a clay-like mixture that hardened over time. The walls were uneven, the floors were packed earth, and the rooms were few. Each house began as a frame of heavy wooden beams. These beams were joined together without nails. Instead, wooden pegs and carved joints held everything in place. Builders used trees from nearby forests, often oak or elm, because they were strong and easy to shape with hand tools. The wood was not cut with machines. It was split, shaved, and shaped with axes and saws. Each beam was lifted by hand or with ropes and placed into position by neighbors or family members working together. The walls between the beams were filled in with a method known as wattle and daub. Thin branches were woven together in a loose lattice, creating a surface like a basket. Then a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and sometimes animal dung was spread over this frame. The material was pressed in by hand, smoothed with wooden paddles, and left to dry. Once hardened, it formed a rough but sturdy barrier against the wind. These walls were not sealed tightly. Cold air still passed through, especially during winter. On some days, people could feel drafts moving along the floor or around the doorframe. Roofs were thatched, using long grasses or reeds, gathered from fields and riverbanks. These were layered tightly and bound together in bundles. Workers tied them to wooden poles, starting from the bottom edge of the roof and moving upward. The thatch helped shed rain and snow, though it required regular upkeep. Birds sometimes pulled pieces out to build nests. Over time, the roof became uneven and dark with soot and weather. A good thatched roof lasted 10 or 15 years before needing repair. Windows, if a house had them, were small and covered with stretched animal skin or oiled parchment. These coverings allowed a little light to enter, but kept out the worst of the wind. Glass was rare and expensive, found only in buildings owned by the wealthy or by the church. The inside of the house was dim, even in daytime. Shadows filled the corners. Only the area near the door or fire had enough light to see clearly. At night, it was nearly dark. Most families used small oil lamps or the glow of the fire to move about. The house was usually one large room, with a central hearth in the middle. The fire served as the main source of warmth and the place where food was prepared. Smoke from the fire rose through a hole in the roof. In some houses, there was no chimney. The smoke drifted out slowly through the thatch, filling the upper space of the room and settling in the clothing and hair of everyone inside. Breathing was sometimes difficult after long exposure, especially in the winter when fires burned for hours each day. The smell of smoke never truly left the home. Furniture was simple and made from wood. A table might stand in the center, surrounded by low stools or benches. In one corner, there would be a raised platform for sleeping, often shared by the entire family. In poor homes, bedding was nothing more than straw on the floor, covered with blankets and old cloths. In slightly wealthier homes, wooden bed frames with rope supports were used, though the ropes needed frequent tightening. Walls might hold a few shelves for storage, but space was limited. Most belongings were stored in chests or hung from beams overhead. Animals often shared the space with people. In many homes, there was no clear divide between living areas and animal pens. Chickens walked freely across the floor. Goats or pigs were tied near the door. In the coldest months, cows or sheep were sometimes brought indoors for warmth. Their breath added moisture to the air. Their bodies gave off heat. Their sounds blended into the quiet rhythm of everyday life. The door was a simple wooden slab, held closed by a latch or beam. It creaked when opened and let in the cold. Near the door, a small pile of wood or kindling might be stacked. A broom, made of twigs, stood against the wall. Boots, cloaks, and tools hung from nails, driven into the beams. Every item had its place. Clutter made life harder in a small space. The floor, being made of compacted earth, was swept clean, but never truly smooth. It turned to mud in heavy rains and hardened into rough ridges during dry weather. Sometimes people spread straw or rushes across it for comfort. These were changed when they grew too dirty or damp. Underfoot, the earth stayed cool year-round, which helped during the summer but added to the chill in winter. Walls were not decorated. There were no paintings or hangings in most homes. At most, a family might have a religious carving or a small wooden cross. Some children scratched marks into the walls or beams, simple shapes or initials. These were not meant for beauty, only to pass the time or leave a trace of themselves. Life inside these homes followed a pattern shaped by the seasons. In the warmer months, the door stayed open to let in fresh air and light. Children played just outside, while parents worked in the fields or gardened. In winter, the door stayed closed as much as possible. People gathered near the fire, working with their hands. Women spun wool or mended clothes. Men carved tools or repaired broken furniture. Children helped with chores or sat quietly nearby. Noise was minimal. There was no sound of machines or outside traffic. The loudest noise might be the wind pushing against the door or the fire cracking inside the hearth. Most conversations were soft and brief. There was little privacy, so people chose their words carefully. The house was a place of rest and routine, not entertainment or ceremony. Homes were passed from parent to child. Repairs were constant. A beam might be replaced after years of rot. A wall might need new daub before winter. Thatch had to be checked after storms. Nothing was thrown away easily. Every board and nail was reused if possible. The house grew old alongside the people who lived in it. When guests arrived, they were offered a seat by the fire, a cup of warm drink, a piece of bread, if there was extra. Hospitality was quiet and expected. No one had much, but what they had, they shared. These homes, though cold and rough by modern standards, were filled with effort and memory. They sheltered generations through hunger, sickness, and cold. The air inside stayed cool in every season. Even with a fire, there were no sealed windows or heavy doors. Warmth was something made, not something kept. Yet people lived. They worked. They raised children. They grew old within those four rough walls. Their lives were shaped by the homes they built, and those homes stood because of the lives they carried. These timber houses still echo in villages where foundations remain. You can walk where those walls once stood. Imagine the fire, hear the quiet, and remember that even the simplest shelter held a world within it. Chapter 3. Explain how people layered animal skins for body warmth. In a time before heated rooms and woven synthetics, survival in the cold meant wrapping the body in what the land could offer. And that often meant animal skins, thick, heavy, and full of warmth. The winters were long and difficult, with temperatures dropping sharply at night, and people could not afford to let the cold seep into their bones. Clothing was not worn for style or fashion, but for necessity, and every layer mattered. The process of preparing and layering animal skins was a basic skill, learned through observation, repeated over generations, and quietly practiced in nearly every household. Animal skins came from livestock, raised for food, or animals hunted in the wild. Nothing was wasted. Once the meat was removed, The hide was cleaned, scraped and stretched on wooden frames. These frames stood outside, often leaning against the side of a home or shed. The process was slow and required patience. Workers scraped the inner layer to remove any remaining tissue, then rubbed in salt, ashes, or natural tannins found in tree bark. These substances helped preserve the skin, making it less likely to rot. In colder regions, the skins were often left with the fur still attached, which added insulation and comfort. The fur on these skins was usually coarse, not soft. It was the type that held in heat well and did not easily wear down. Common animals used for this purpose included sheep, goats, deer, and rabbits. Each provided different textures and levels of warmth. Deer hides were often used for outer layers because they were thicker and more durable. Rabbit fur was softer and sometimes used for inner linings near the chest and arms. Sheep hides were the most common, easy to obtain, and fairly easy to treat. Once the skins were ready, they were cut into large sections using small knives. These pieces were shaped roughly to the human form, though not with exact measurements. People did not use patterns as we know them today. Instead, they layered pieces over their bodies, tied them with cords or belts, and adjusted them as needed. The clothing was often uneven and bulky. Arms were sometimes restricted, and movement could be difficult. But the warmth it gave was more important than comfort or ease. The base layer underneath the skins was usually made of linen or another simple fabric. This layer helped separate the skin from the body and absorb sweat. Over this, people would add multiple pieces of treated hide. One might cover the shoulders and chest. Another would be wrapped around the waist. Long strips of fur might be tied around the legs, held in place with leather straps. The layering was not done with elegance, but with care. Each piece had to stay in place through daily work, and so the fit was snug. In colder climates, people often covered their heads with animal hoods, made from entire pelts. These hoods sometimes still had the shape of the animal's head, with ears or fur patterns clearly visible. They offered full coverage, from forehead to neck, and helped reduce the loss of body heat through the scalp. The mouth and nose might be covered with an additional strip of fur, especially during strong winds or snow. Breathing through fur was not easy, but it prevented the lungs from taking in icy air directly. Children wore smaller versions of these garments. They were not spared from outdoor tasks or cold weather. Skins were sewn into simple tunics for them, tied at the waist, and passed down between siblings as they grew. Repairing these garments was common. Tiers were stitched with gut thread, and holes were patched with leftover scraps. No piece was thrown away. Even small strips were used to wrap hands or feet when gloves or shoes were unavailable. Footwear was also made from hide. Soft leather was used for inner shoes, while tougher skins formed the outer layer. In the winter, people often added extra wrapping around their ankles to prevent snow or water from entering. Some used dry grass between their foot and the shoe to absorb moisture and provide cushioning. The shoes were stiff in the morning and loosened as the day warmed slightly, though they rarely kept out the cold completely. The smell of the skins was natural and ever-present. Treated hides carried the scent of earth, smoke, and the animals they once belonged to. This scent filled homes and clung to garments. It was not considered unpleasant. It was simply part of life. The touch of the fur, the roughness of the outer surface, and the warmth trapped underneath became familiar sensations during the colder months. At night, people did not change into separate clothing for sleep. Instead, they wore their layers into bed. Blankets made from skins were laid over top. Often, individuals lay close together, pressing the warmth of their layered garments against one another. This combination of fire, animal hides, and body heat kept the cold from settling in too deeply during the long dark hours. Women played a large role in preparing and mending these skins. They spent hours stitching, softening, and adjusting each piece for better fit and longer wear. Spools of sinew thread sat beside wooden needles, The work was done near the fire, with careful hands and quiet focus. Men hunted and prepared the larger animals, while women transformed their hides into something lasting and protective. During travel, extra layers were added. Travelers wore heavy cloaks of overlapping skins, some of which reached to the ground. These cloaks were tied tightly around the body, sometimes reinforced with wool if it was available. Underneath, every part of the body was wrapped. Hands were placed inside fur mitts or covered in strips of cloth, bound with string. Faces were hidden beneath hoods, leaving only the eyes exposed to the air. Inside the village, people might remove outer layers while indoors, but never all at once. The cold inside homes still lingered. Removing too much could cause the body to cool rapidly. Most people kept their core layers on at all times during the winter season. Even during meals or rest, their bodies stayed wrapped in fur and hide, shoulders rising gently with each breath beneath the weight of the coverings. When spring arrived, these garments were aired out and cleaned as best as possible. They were brushed with twigs or rubbed with cloth. Some were stored in dry places, hung from beams in the ceiling to protect them from damp soil. Others were left outside under the sun for a few days before being packed away. If damage had occurred during the winter, mending was done immediately to prepare for the next season. Layering animal skins was not just about staying warm. It was about using what nature provided, adapting to the rhythms of weather and land, and passing on knowledge that had no written form. Each family had its own way of doing it. Each person learned their own routine, adjusting their layers with the shifting cold, knowing what felt best, what protected them the most, and what kept them working through the snow. These skins were not just garments. They were protection. They were the boundary between survival and suffering, and in that silent, snow-covered world, they offered a form of comfort no fire could replace. Chapter 4. Illustrate nightly routines, lighting small hearth fires indoors. As daylight faded, and the last blue streaks of evening sky sank behind the trees, medieval homes settled into a calm rhythm, guided by habit and necessity. Lighting the hearth fire was not an option. It was the quiet center of the night, a ritual performed without words, without haste, and with full awareness that warmth would not come on its own. The air inside was cold, touched with dampness, and the chill from the earth beneath seeped up through boots and floors. Families knew the steps by heart. Each movement came from repetition, learned over long winters, and taught from one generation to the next. In the fading light, the house dimmed slowly. Windows, if there were any, had already been covered with cloth or leather to block out wind. The room grew darker by the minute. Most work outside had stopped. Tools were stacked against walls. Water had been fetched from the well before dusk. Wood was brought inside in small bundles, resting near the hearth, sorted by size and dryness. Only the small crackling of twigs and the soft steps of people moving around signaled that evening was beginning. To begin the fire, someone crouched near the hearth, often the oldest or the most careful. Starting the fire took time and attention. A small pile of dried twigs was arranged in a loose bundle. These came from hedges and old branches gathered days earlier. Beneath this bundle, dry moss or straw was pressed together tightly, serving as the first spark's cradle. A flint stone and steel striker were used. The sound of the stone striking metal echoed quietly through the room. Sparks flew, barely visible, until one finally caught. A thin thread of smoke curled upward. Breath was held as the flame spread. The person leaned in gently, blowing slow and steady. The moss darkened, then glowed. A flicker appeared. The light, still weak, danced just above the floor. Once the twigs caught, larger sticks were added, piece by piece, in a small pyramid. Nothing was rushed. The fire grew slowly. Orange light filled the lower half of the room, throwing shadows across the uneven walls and low wooden beams above. Children watched from across the room. They sat on benches or straw-covered ground, wrapped in furs, their faces calm. There was no loud talk. The fire's light softened their features. As the flames rose higher, the sharp smell of smoke blended with the scent of earth and dried grass. Ashes from the previous night were pushed to the sides of the hearth. Coals from the day before, if any remained, were stirred gently with a stick. Sometimes, a glowing coal had survived, buried deep in gray ash. When found, it was a small gift. It made the night's fire easier to start. The firewood used depended on what the family had. Oak burned long and steady. Hazel caught quickly. Birch crackled and sparked. No piece was wasted. Even small slivers were placed carefully into the fire. Bark, peeled earlier in the week, helped fuel the early flames. Larger logs would be added once the fire was stable, once the heat had begun to reach the space around it. These logs were not large by modern standards, just enough to last a few hours, maybe through the night, if used wisely. Near the fire, people gathered slowly. The youngest might sit closest, hands stretched out, absorbing warmth through stiff fingers. Adults sat behind them, often working with their hands, mending clothes, twisting cords, or preparing tools for the next day. The fire offered just enough light to see one's work. Shadows flickered constantly. The glow reached only so far. Beyond it, corners remained dark and cool. Before the night settled fully, pots were moved onto the hearth. They rested on stones or iron hooks, depending on the family's tools. A simple meal might be warmed, broth left from the afternoon, or a piece of bread held over a flat stone to soften. Hot liquid helped warm the body from the inside. Clay cups were passed around carefully. Each sip was quiet and slow. Tending the fire continued even as others rested. Ash was pushed back. Logs were repositioned with a wooden stick or iron rod. If sparks flew out, they were stamped quickly with a boot or pressed back in. The fire had to be kept safe. A small accident could damage the house, or worse, the floor beneath the hearth was usually stone or packed with old ashes. The area around it was kept clear. A ring of bricks or clay sometimes formed a low barrier. As night deepened, the fire burned lower. Only 1 or 2 logs remained. Flames shrank into glowing coals. The heat they gave was softer now, but steady. The light flickered more slowly. Families drew blankets or animal hides around themselves. Some leaned against the wall, others curled beside the hearth. It was not unusual for people to fall asleep sitting upright, lulled by the warmth and rhythm of the flames. Breathing in the room slowed. The occasional cough or movement of fabric was all that broke the silence. A faint hiss came from the last damp stick. The fire did not need to be large. It only needed to last through the coldest part of the night. If the fire went out completely, someone would have to rise early and start it again from cold ashes. That meant more work, more time, and a colder start to the morning. Near the fire, tools used for kindling were set aside for tomorrow. The striker and flint were placed on a small ledge, or inside a clay bowl. Twigs were gathered again in a new pile. Damp wood was laid near the hearth, to dry overnight. Preparing for the next night began while this one was still unfolding. Sometimes, families placed heated stones in cloth and set them near sleeping spaces. These stones had sat near the fire for hours, soaking in heat. Wrapped tightly, they gave off gentle warmth for a short while. They were placed at the feet, inside straw mattresses, or beneath thick blankets. Children especially welcomed this small comfort. As everyone settled in, the fire was left with 1 or 2 burning coals. A final adjustment was made. A log pushed slightly to one side, or a pile of ash moved over a still glowing ember. The goal was to keep the fire alive without wasting fuel. In the morning, those same coals might spark the first light of day. The fire was not just heat. It was the evening's anchor. It gave shape to the end of the day. It marked the time when work ceased and stillness began. Lighting it was not a task, but a rhythm, performed without noise or decoration. It brought people close. It lit their faces with soft orange light. It reminded them, Each night, that survival was not a battle. It was a practice carried out one small glowing flame at a time. Chapter 5. Detail. Carrying embers between rooms to preserve heat. When the cold touched every surface and the air in the home grew heavy with frost, people found quiet ways to keep warmth alive. Methods shaped by habit, patience, and the slow understanding that even a single ember could mean the difference between comfort and hardship. One such method was the careful transport of embers from one place to another, often done at the earliest hour or the latest moment of the day. This task did not seem grand. There was no noise or firelight, just a soft glow cradled in clay carried by steady hands across cold floors in silence. The ember itself came from the heart of the fire. After the flames had burned low, when logs were no longer stacked, but instead reduced to ash and faint glow, someone would lean close and study the coals. Not all were useful. The ember had to be alive, not too weak, and not too large. It had to carry heat without flame, steady enough to survive movement, but gentle enough not to catch what surrounded it. Finding the right one took time. Ash was brushed aside with a flat stick. Small puffs of gray dust rose and settled again. Then there it was, a deep orange glow nestled under the surface, pulsing with life. This ember was transferred into a vessel. Most homes used a clay pot with a thick base and narrow top, shaped to trap the heat and shield the spark from air. The inside was lined with ash to insulate it, while the ember was placed gently on top. Sometimes an extra pinch of moss or straw was added to protect the ember from direct wind. A lid or flat stone might cover the top, not sealing it completely, but enough to keep the ember from burning out too quickly. These pots were not decorative. They were tools, used again and again. Their sides were blackened from years of smoke. Their edges were rough, but they worked. Carrying the ember was not rushed. The person walked slowly. The pot was held in both hands, close to the body, often wrapped in cloth, to protect from the heat. Each step was careful. A quick movement could stir air, feeding the ember too much and risking ignition. A sudden shake could bury the ember in ash or snuff it out. So they moved through the house, step by step, mindful of every motion. In some homes this walk meant going from the main hearth to a smaller room, used for sleeping or working. Not every space had its own fire. Fuel was scarce. It was easier to move heat than to create it again from nothing. The ember was placed in a second hearth or sometimes in a fire bowl. Twigs and dried leaves were arranged nearby. A careful breath was blown across the ember, coaxing it to respond. The glow brightened, flickered, and if the conditions were right, caught the kindling. Smoke rose slowly. Soon, the new fire would grow. Other times, embers were moved across separate buildings. If a family had a shed, a workshop, or another shelter where someone worked late or rose early, that space needed heat too. In those cases, the ember was carried outside. The air would bite at the skin. Wind pressed against clothing, but the pot had to be held steady. One hand often covered the top, guarding it from gusts. The walk was short, but cold made it feel longer. Once inside, the fire-making began again, exactly as before. Even among neighbors, embers were shared. If a fire had gone out overnight, someone might go next door and ask for a live coal. No one refused. Warmth was not a possession. It was passed around. A glowing ember was given with quiet words and handed with care. The receiving person would nod, cover it with cloth, and return home to rebuild what was lost. These exchanges happened early in the morning, often before the sun rose. In some regions, metal boxes with handles were used to carry coals over longer distances. These boxes had small holes along the sides to let in just enough air. Inside, ash cushioned the ember. They were heavier than clay pots but sturdier. Blacksmiths often made them for wealthier households. Still, most villagers used simpler methods. It was not the tool that mattered most. It was the care taken in the process. Children were taught this task as part of daily life. A boy or girl might follow an older sibling or parent, watching how they held the pot, how they placed the ember, how they blew across it with just enough breath. Learning took time. It was not explained with words, but through repetition. A child might be allowed to carry a pot when the weather was calm. Over time they learned to recognize a good ember, to know when one was too weak or when one burned too fast. The act of carrying an ember between rooms or buildings meant more than just preserving fire. It meant preserving rhythm. It connected yesterday's warmth with today's need. It linked the sleeping hours with the working one. It joined one part of the home to another, making each space part of the same whole. Without it, fire would need to be started from flint and stone each time. A longer, more uncertain process. There were small signs that told people whether the ember was still alive. If smoke slipped from the top of the pot, it meant the ember was too hot and might need adjustment. If no warmth was felt through the sides, it might have gone out. Often the pot was opened briefly and checked. A faint red light was enough to give hope. A sudden rush of cold air could snuff it out, so even that small action had to be done with care. Sometimes embers were used not to light fires, but to warm tools or dry cloth. A few glowing coals placed under a piece of iron could make it easier to work. A pot left near damp boots helped them dry overnight. Warmth was used wherever it could be, passed along in quiet ways that required no discussion. It was simply how things were done. During the darkest weeks of winter, when sunlight barely touched the village, and the cold stayed through both day and night, the ember became more important. It offered continuity in a season that brought discomfort and illness. The ember in the pot was not impressive. It did not shine like a flame or give heat to an entire room, but it held potential. It was trusted to last. It was relied upon every day. At the end of each evening, before people slept, the fire's coals were carefully prepared for morning. Ash was spread over them to slow their burn. The brightest pieces were buried deep. The pot was placed nearby, ready to be filled before dawn. This task, so small and silent, was a form of preparation, a way of looking ahead without words or plans. In the middle of the night, with frost on the windows and silence all around, one person might rise, walk to the hearth, and feel under the ash for what remained. With luck, the ember would still be glowing. In this quiet act, lifting the pot, cradling it in cloth, walking it across a cold floor, breathing gently to keep it alive, there was warmth, not just of heat, but of presence, patience, and care. It was one ember, one breath, one room at a time. And that was enough. Chapter 6. Outline. Using thick wool blankets for extra insulation. In the quiet hours when warmth could not be drawn from walls or floor, when fire burned low and wind pressed through every crack, thick wool blankets became one of the last defenses against the chill. These blankets were not soft by modern standards, nor decorative. They were coarse, dense, and sometimes heavy enough to feel like weight against the chest. But they were trusted. Night after night, they held in the body's warmth and kept the cold air from settling too deep into the skin. The process of making these blankets began long before winter came. Wool was gathered in the warmer months, sheared from sheep by hand, using iron clippers, then washed in cold water to remove dirt and oils. It was laid out to dry in open air, often on hedges or flat stones. Once dried, the wool was carded, a method of separating and aligning the fibers using wooden paddles with small teeth. This was slow work. It was done in corners of the home, beside the hearth, or outside in warmer weather. Wool was gathered into long rolls, spun into yarn, and then woven into cloth using a simple loom that might take up a full wall of a small room. The woven cloth was not always perfectly straight. It could be uneven at the edges or carry slight knots where the yarn had broken. But once cut, the fabric was thick, full of air between the fibers, which trapped body heat efficiently. These pieces were stitched together by hand using large wooden or bone needles. Thread was usually spun from wool as well. The edges were hemmed with simple loops to prevent unraveling. Many blankets had no dye or color. They remained the gray or off-white of the sheet they came from. A blanket might serve a family for many years. It would be patched with scraps when worn, sometimes doubled over to add warmth. A thin blanket was folded in layers, and one large one might be shared by 2 or more people. During the coldest weeks, some families used all the blankets they owned at once. These were laid one over the other on sleeping platforms made of straw or hay. The first layer insulated from below, the rest kept heat in from above. At night, once the fire had burned low and the last embers had been checked, families would move quietly toward their beds or sleeping spaces. These were not separate rooms for each person. Most families shared a single sleeping area, especially in winter. Thick blankets were brought out from storage chests, folded, shaken gently to remove dust, and placed over those who were ready to sleep. Children were covered first, tucked in close to parents or older siblings. The layers of wool pressed down gently, calming movement and creating stillness. The texture of the wool was rough against bare skin. People wore layers to sleep, so the blanket rarely touched directly, but the weight was felt. It grounded the body. There was little shifting once under it. The blanket conformed to the shape of the person underneath, creating small pockets of warm air that stayed trapped until morning. Even in houses where smoke crept in or wind whistled through wooden beams, the blanket offered a sense of enclosure. Sometimes, the wool absorbed smells from the hearth or the animals nearby. It was not washed often. When cleaning was needed, it was beaten outside or hung in the sun. But in winter, it stayed indoors, folded carefully during the day and opened again at dusk. Families often had 1 or 2 blankets that were considered their warmest. These were reserved for the youngest or the eldest in the household, those most vulnerable to the cold. The rest managed with what was left. Wool blankets were also used beyond the bed. In the early morning before the fire was lit, a blanket might be wrapped around shoulders while moving through the house. It hung down to the knees, arms folded underneath, forming a kind of robe that followed the person from one room to another. Some tied it at the chest with rope or a strip of cloth. Children might sit on them while playing indoors. If someone was sick, the blanket would stay with them all day, draped over the knees or wrapped tightly at the back. There were other ways to increase warmth alongside the blanket. Heated stones, placed beneath, added gentle heat. Straw stuffed beneath a mattress raised the body above the cold floor. But without a blanket, all of it was less effective. The blanket sealed in what little warmth the person created. It turned the bed into a small shelter. It transformed a cold corner into a resting place. In some homes, extra wool was kept in bundles, spun loosely, and stored for emergencies. If a blanket tore badly or burned from a falling coal, the wool could be rewoven into patches. This patching was done carefully, matching the weave by eye. The goal was not beauty, it was function. Every repaired blanket told a quiet story of nights endured and cold survived. The colors of the blankets were sometimes altered with natural dyes from plants or roots, though this was less common. If a family had the means, they might add a deep brown or faded blue, but most remained simple. What mattered was the weave, how tightly it was packed, how little air escaped. Some blankets grew stiff from years of use and exposure to smoke. These were softened by rubbing with the hands, rolled up tightly and unrolled again until they loosened. During harsh storms or long periods of snow, people stayed in bed longer than usual. Wrapped in layers, beneath several blankets, they waited for weather to pass. The fire burned low to save wood. Blankets helped carry the body through those slow hours. Breath steamed lightly into the space between the blanket and the face. Eyelids grew heavy under the weight. Sleep came easier in the warmth. When traveling in winter, travelers carried blankets rolled tightly and tied to their backs. These were laid on cold ground at night, wrapped around shoulders during the day, and kept dry at all costs. A wet blanket could freeze, losing its purpose. If firewood ran low, the blanket became the final protection. Many journeys were remembered by the quality of the blanket carried. The memory of those nights stayed with people. The feeling of thick wool, drawn up to the chin, the way it muffled the sound of the wind outside. The stillness, it brought in a room that creaked and shifted with every gust. People held onto their blankets long after they frayed. Some passed them down to younger family members, stitched with initials or simple markings to show where they came from. Blankets were not spoken of with affection, but they were valued deeply. They represented safety, routine, and quiet comfort. In a world without central heat or sealed windows, they were among the most personal items a person owned. They rested against the skin night after night, season after season. They were the first thing reached for at dusk and the last thing released at dawn. So when the cold deepened and the fire dwindled, it was the wool blanket that held everything together, body, breath, and warmth, all beneath one silent, trusted layer. Chapter 7. Present walking indoors, wearing fur-lined leather boots. In the cold stillness of medieval homes, where stone floors held the chill of the earth, and drafts slipped through gaps in walls, movement was slow and deliberate, especially when it came to footwear. Fur-lined leather boots were more than just protection for the feet. They were essential armor against the cold that crept up through floors and seeped into every corner of a dwelling. Walking indoors in these boots was a daily practice, shaped by both necessity and quiet awareness of the biting winter air that awaited just beyond the door. These boots were crafted with care, from animal hides tanned and softened over many days. The leather was thick, rough on the outside, but supple enough to mold to the wearer's foot. Inside, the fur lining was dense, often sourced from the same animals that provided the leather or from smaller creatures prized for their warm pelts. The fur was attached carefully, stitched into the boot's interior to cover the sole, sides, and sometimes extending up to the ankle or calf. This lining trapped heat close to the skin, preventing the cold from creeping in during long days spent outside or cold nights indoors. Putting on these boots was a daily ritual. Feet, often damp or chilled from morning chores, were carefully slid into the warm interiors. Sometimes the fur felt prickly, a sharp contrast to the skin beneath thin socks made from wool or linen. The snug fit was important. If the boots were too loose, cold air could swirl inside and defeat their purpose. Too tight, and circulation would be restricted, causing discomfort, and over time increasing the risk of frostbite. Those who lived in colder regions learned to balance fit with warmth. Walking across the stone or packed earth floors of a medieval home in these boots created soft, muffled sounds. The soles, worn from use, made a dull scrape rather than a sharp tap. This gentle noise blended with the crackle of the hearth fire and the quiet rustle of blankets or furs. Movement was slower indoors than outside, partly because of the uneven ground and partly because the heavy boots required more effort with each step. Even simple actions like crossing from one room to another were measured and careful. The weight of the boots pulled slightly on the ankles and calves, a constant reminder of the coldness outside. Inside, the warmth generated by bodies, fires, and layered clothing softened this burden. Occasionally, a person would pause, shifting weight from one foot to the other, feeling the boot's insulation keep the chill at bay. The boots were a barrier against the elements, a small but vital piece of comfort amid otherwise cold surroundings. Fur-lined leather boots also served as protection from dampness. Floors could be wet from snow or rain tracked in from outside. In some homes, water dripped through roofs or walls during storms. The leather's durability helped keep feet dry longer than simple cloth shoes. Fur, though not waterproof, absorbed moisture slowly, providing a buffer between wetness and skin. However, if boots became soaked, they were removed as soon as possible and dried near the fire, often stuffed with dry straw or rags to absorb moisture. Inside the home, boots were not always taken off immediately upon entry. The chill made people reluctant to expose their bare feet to the cold floor. Removing boots risked losing warmth quickly. Instead, many wore their boots inside throughout much of the day, especially during the coldest months. Footwear became part of indoor attire. This practice was especially true for those who worked in colder, less insulated parts of the home, such as storage rooms or cellars. When moving through the rooms, the leather soles offered enough grip on stone or wooden floors to prevent slipping. This was important, as sudden falls could cause injury in spaces with low ceilings and uneven surfaces. Boots cushioned footsteps, making daily chores easier despite the cold. Whether carrying water, preparing food, or tending animals nearby, footwear was a constant companion. Cleaning the boots was part of the routine. Mud, dirt, and ash were brushed off with stiff twigs or rough cloth. Leather was rubbed with animal fat or oils when available to soften and waterproof the material. Fur linings were shaken out and, if necessary, combed to remove debris. These tasks were done near the hearth's light, where heat helped dry the leather. Proper care extended the boot's lifespan, which was important given the difficulty in replacing worn footwear. Boots were sometimes repaired with leather patches or resewn seams. In colder villages, traveling cobblers might visit occasionally, but most repairs were done at home. A needle and thread were kept nearby for quick fixes. Seams that opened were a source of cold drafts. Families knew that small holes or loose stitching could lead to discomfort and even sickness if ignored during winter. Children wore smaller versions of these boots, often handed down from older siblings or relatives. Their boots were similarly lined with fur, though less sturdy and sometimes patched with cloth or scraps of leather. Growing feet meant constant adjustment and repair. Parents worked to ensure that children's boots fit well enough to keep out cold, even if the style was rough or the fit imperfect. Visitors and neighbors were expected to wear boots inside, especially in colder weather. Removing boots at the door was less common than in modern times. Instead, the heavy boots marked a transition from outdoor cold to indoor warmth, but remained a layer of protection against the chill. In communal gatherings or shared meals, the sight of boots was normal, and their weight was accepted as part of the environment. Some people added extra layers inside their boots during extreme cold. Thin strips of cloth or wool socks were wrapped around the feet, sometimes doubled or tripled for insulation. These layers helped trap heat and added softness beneath the firm leather. The weight and bulkiness increased, making movement more deliberate and slower. Still, this was preferred to bare feet or simple shoes. The fur lining also had practical benefits beyond warmth. It absorbed sweat and prevented skin from rubbing directly against rough leather, reducing the risk of blisters or sores. During long days spent outdoors, these boots help protect feet from cold stones, frozen ground, and sharp objects. Inside the home, they cushioned against hard floors and reduced the impact of moving around in heavy clothing. Walking indoors in fur-lined leather boots was a practice woven into daily life. It was shaped by the landscape, the seasons, and the limited means of heating homes. The boots connected the wearer to the earth beneath and the cold air outside, acting as a buffer between harsh elements and fragile skin. Their presence was constant, steady, and quietly reliable. Even when sitting near the hearth, boots were often kept on. The warmth of the fire did not fully reach the feet. The boots held in residual heat from the day's work and kept toes from stiffening in the cold air. Occasionally, someone would flex their feet or wiggle toes inside, feeling the soft fur that lined every inch. The sound of boots shuffling on floors mixed with the crackling of fire and the soft breathing of those resting nearby. The atmosphere was calm and slow. The boots, heavy and lined with fur, carried the weight of survival in their form. They were tools, but also companions through long nights and cold mornings. When night deepened, boots were sometimes slipped off before sleep. They were placed near the hearth or on wooden racks. Dry straw might be tucked inside to keep shape and absorb moisture. In the morning, the process began again, sliding feet back into the warmth of fur and leather, ready to face another cold day. Fur-lined leather boots were a simple solution in a harsh world. They provided warmth, protection, and a degree of comfort when few other options existed. Their steady presence in medieval homes was a quiet testament to the resilience of those who lived through winters without modern heat or insulation. The boots carried more than feet. They carried endurance, routine, and survival. Chapter 8. Narrate collecting straw and hay for bedding layers. In the slow rhythm of medieval life, the simple act of gathering straw and hay took on a quiet importance, especially as the long nights of winter approached and the need for warmth became urgent. These natural materials, harvested from fields and stored carefully, served as the foundation of bedding that insulated bodies from cold floors and stiffened air. Collecting straw and hay was not a hurried chore, but a deliberate task, performed with steady hands and quiet thought, ensuring comfort and survival through the darkest months. The process began during the warmer seasons, when grass grew tall and fields were alive with movement. As the sun dried the stalks, farmers and villagers cut hay and straw using hand tools, such as sickles or scythes. Each stalk was carefully sliced near the base, then left to dry in bundles on the ground or tied into small sheaves. The smell of fresh-cut grass and earth filled the air during these harvests, faintly sweet and clean. Drying was essential because damp straw or hay could rot or mold, making it useless for bedding and dangerous for health. Once the harvest was dry, it was gathered into larger stacks, often in barns or covered sheds where it could be protected from rain and snow. These stacks were sometimes shaped like small pyramids or simple piles, resting on raised platforms to keep moisture from the earth below. Storing straw and hay in a dry place was vital. If the material became wet, it lost its insulating properties and could become heavy or sour-smelling. Families checked their stores regularly, moving or rearranging bundles to keep air flowing and prevent mold. When the first cold winds signaled the approach of winter, people began to prepare their homes for the drop in temperature. Straw and hay were pulled from their storage with care. Sometimes, handfuls were carried inside daily, especially if the weather outside was harsh. The smell of dried grass mixed with smoke from the hearth, creating a quiet, earthy scent that filled the home. It was not an unpleasant smell, but one tied to warmth and shelter. Inside the house, straw and hay were spread carefully across the floors and sleeping platforms. Floors were often packed earth or rough wood planks that felt cold and hard beneath bare feet. A thick layer of straw created a barrier, softening the ground and trapping air between the stalks. This air acted as insulation, slowing the loss of body heat during sleep. Beds were often raised slightly above the floor on wooden frames or bundles of straw to further reduce contact with cold earth. In addition to floors, straw was layered inside mattresses or bed ticks made from coarse cloth. These fabric sacks were stuffed full of straw, fluffed and replaced as needed. The texture of dried stalks was prickly, but offered cushioning and warmth. Each night, people laid themselves on these straw-filled beds, often covering the surface with woven blankets or animal skins. The layers combined to create a warm, breathable space that helped keep the chill at bay. Hay, which was softer and greener than straw, was sometimes used interchangeably, but was more likely to be found in places where livestock was kept. In barns or stables, animals rested on beds of hay, which absorbed moisture and provided warmth. Families often collected leftover hay or straw from animal pens to reuse in bedding. This practice was practical and resourceful, ensuring nothing was wasted and that warmth was maintained across the household. The act of spreading straw was usually a communal one. Before nightfall, family members might gather in the sleeping area to prepare beds. Straw was shaken loose, fluffed up, and spread evenly. Small clumps were pulled apart and rearranged. This quiet work created a sense of routine and care. The movement of hands through the dry stalks made soft rustling sounds. The tactile sensation was soothing, connecting the person to the earth and the changing seasons. Straw and hay also played a role in other parts of the home. They could be placed near the hearth to catch ashes or under kitchen tools to absorb spills. In some cases, bundles were tied to walls or placed under windowsills to block drafts. Though simple, these measures contributed to creating a warmer, more comfortable space. The presence of straw in so many areas of the home was a constant reminder of its value. During the coldest nights, people would adjust their straw bedding as needed. If the house felt especially damp or the wind strong, additional layers might be added. At times, old straw was removed and replaced with fresh bundles to maintain cleanliness and effectiveness. While washing straw was not practical, airing it out in sunlight helped prevent mustiness. These efforts were subtle but important for health and comfort. Straw and hay were not only functional, but symbolic. They marked the passing of seasons and the care that went into preparing for winter. The smell of dry grass, the feel of stalks beneath fingers, and the sight of neatly stacked bundles in a corner of the home were part of a larger rhythm of life. They connected people to the land and to one another through shared work and quiet preparation. Children learned from an early age how to handle straw and hay. They were taught to gather small bundles, carry them carefully, and spread them evenly without tearing or crushing the stalks. This knowledge was passed down without much talk, more through watching and helping. It was part of growing up, a small but meaningful contribution to the family's well-being. Straw also provided a place of safety during storms. In homes without stone floors or insulation, bedding was the last refuge against cold. Wrapped in thick blankets over straw mattresses, people found some measure of softness and warmth. The dry grass muffled footsteps and softened voices. It gave the room a quiet stillness that encouraged rest and calm. Even after long use, straw could be recycled in other ways. It was composted or fed to animals when no longer suitable for bedding. The cycle of use and reuse was slow and measured, reflecting a way of life that valued every resource. Straw was never wasted, always accounted for in the rhythms of home and farm. Collecting straw and hay was more than gathering material. It was gathering comfort, preparing shelter, and sustaining life. It required patience, care, and an understanding of the land's cycles. Through the simple, repetitive acts of harvesting, drying, storing, and spreading, people created a warm foundation for the long winter nights. It was a quiet work done with steady hands, helping bodies rest and recover in the face of cold. Chapter 9 portrayed daily tasks to keep body temperature stable. Surviving the cold of medieval winters required more than just blankets and fires. It demanded constant, deliberate care to keep the body's temperature steady throughout the day. Every task, no matter how small, played a role in maintaining warmth in a world without modern heating. The rhythm of daily life was shaped by these quiet efforts, moving through a balance of work, rest, and simple acts designed to preserve the fragile warmth held within each person's body. Beginning each day, people prepared themselves with clothing choices that layered protection from the cold. Woolen garments were combined with linen shirts and animal skins, creating a system that trapped air and preserved heat. Dressing was done slowly and carefully, ensuring that no skin was left exposed. Even the smallest gap could allow cold to sneak in. So gloves, hats, and scarves made from wool or fur were put on before stepping outside or moving through cold rooms. Physical movement was a key part of staying warm. Simple chores like sweeping the floor, carrying water, or chopping wood kept muscles engaged and blood flowing. People knew that stillness brought cold quickly, so pacing daily activity was necessary. Yet, overexertion was avoided as well because sweating could cool the body down when dried by cold air. The balance was learned over time through quiet experience rather than instruction. Eating was timed to support warmth. Meals were taken at regular intervals to fuel the body with energy needed to generate heat. Foods were often hearty and easy to digest, such as thick soups made from root vegetables, grains, and whatever meat or herbs were available. Drinking warm broths or herbal teas was common, particularly before sleep, to promote circulation and provide comfort against the chill. These liquids warmed the body from the inside out, a gentle and sustaining heat. People also took care to avoid exposure to cold drafts. Doors and windows were kept closed tightly, and simple coverings like cloth or wooden shutters were used to block wind. Moving between rooms was done efficiently to reduce time spent in colder spaces. If work needed to be done outdoors, it was scheduled during the warmest parts of the day, usually mid-morning to early afternoon. This minimized the risk of chilling skin or breath. Hands and feet received special attention. These extremities lost heat fastest and were prone to frostbite. Wearing multiple layers on hands, including leather gloves lined with fur or wool, helped prevent this. Feet were kept warm with thick socks and sturdy boots. If feet became damp from snow or water, they were dried near the fire as soon as possible. Small actions, such as rubbing hands together or placing feet close to embers, were practiced regularly to restore warmth. Rest and sleep followed patterns aimed at conserving body heat. People often went to bed soon after dark, wrapped in multiple layers of clothing and thick blankets. Before sleeping, small movements or stretches helped keep muscles from stiffening. Care was taken to avoid sudden exposure to cold air when leaving the warmth of bed during the night. Some households maintained small hearth fires or heated stones to provide gentle warmth without risking smoke or fire hazards. Cleaning and personal hygiene were adapted to cold conditions. Washing with cold water was limited during winter to avoid chilling the skin. Instead, dry brushing or wiping with cloth was common. Hair was kept tidy to reduce heat loss from the head, one of the body's most vulnerable spots. Caps or scarves were worn indoors as well as outdoors to maintain warmth. Social habits supported temperature control. People gathered in small groups for shared tasks or rest, benefiting from collective body heat. Sitting close near the hearth was common, but distance was maintained to avoid overheating or smoke inhalation. Quiet conversation or reading from simple texts helped keep minds engaged without causing physical exertion. Children's activities were carefully moderated. They played indoors during the coldest times, wrapped in layers and often sitting on warm straw or blankets. Their clothing was adjusted frequently to prevent sweating or chills. Parents monitored children closely, understanding that their smaller bodies could lose heat faster and that illness could result from prolonged exposure. Animals also influenced body warmth. Livestock were kept near homes during winter, providing additional heat through body warmth. People often slept near animal pens or allowed pets indoors for extra comfort. The scent of animals mixed with smoke and hay created a familiar grounding atmosphere in the home. Water management was crucial. Cold water froze easily, so people collected and stored it in containers placed near the fire to prevent freezing. Bathing was limited to avoid chilling, with a focus on maintaining cleanliness through other means. Wells or streams were accessed during daylight hours when temperatures were higher. Simple heating tools were used to supplement body heat. Heated stones, wrapped in cloth, were placed near feet or under bedding. Small fires were kept alive for warmth, but controlled to prevent smoke buildup. Oil lamps fueled by animal fats provided dim light and gentle heat in the evenings. Mental awareness of temperature changes helped people adjust their behavior. Feeling a chill prompted actions such as adding a layer of clothing or moving closer to the fire. Similarly, signs of overheating were noted to prevent sweating and subsequent cooling. This attentiveness was part of daily routine, woven into the fabric of life. The architecture of homes also influenced how people maintained warmth. Rooms facing the sun were used for work or rest during daylight, while colder areas were avoided when possible. Doors between rooms were closed to trap heat in living spaces. Hearth placement was central, maximizing heat distribution. Tools and implements were handled with care to prevent cold hands. Wooden handles were preferred over metal, which became bitterly cold to touch. Gloves were removed briefly and replaced swiftly during tasks. This preserved warmth and prevented injury. People adapted their pace based on temperature. When cold was sharp, movements were slowed and deliberate to conserve energy. On milder days, more active work was done to build warmth. The ebb and flow of activity balanced rest with exertion. Even the timing of activities was strategic. Firewood was gathered and prepared during daylight to avoid cold night work. Meals were cooked early to provide warmth before sleep. Children's lessons or storytelling took place near the fire in evenings, combining warmth with quiet entertainment. In all, daily tasks were performed with a steady, mindful approach designed to maintain body temperature. Each action, from clothing choices to movement, was part of a system that helped people endure cold months. This careful balance of effort and rest created a rhythm of survival shaped by the seasons and the slow passage of time. Through these quiet, routine efforts, people maintained a stable warmth in a world without modern comforts. Their days unfolded gently, with measured movement and care, helping bodies stay strong and calm amid the long, cold nights. The simple acts of daily life became the foundation of endurance and quiet comfort. Chapter 10. Convey making and drinking warm herbal broth before dusk. As dusk settled softly over the quiet village, the simple ritual of preparing warm herbal broth began to unfold with steady purpose and calm patience. This routine, practiced daily by medieval households, was more than nourishment. It was a gentle way to invite warmth back into the body before night fully descended. The brewing of broth was carried out with unhurried hands and quiet care, connecting the rhythms of nature with the needs of the human body in colder times. Water was first drawn from a well or stored container, clear and cool, then placed over the hearth's gentle flames in a heavy pot made of iron or clay. The sound of water beginning to simmer was soft and steady, a quiet signal of comfort to come. As the liquid warmed, handfuls of dried herbs gathered in earlier seasons and stored in small bundles or cloth sacks were added to the pot. These herbs were chosen carefully for their warming properties, mild flavors, and gentle soothing effects. Common herbs included thyme, sage, rosemary, and sometimes wild nettle or chamomile. Each had a subtle role to play in the broth, some to promote circulation, others to calm digestion or soothe the throat. The scent of these herbs mingled with the smoke of the fire, creating a faint calming aroma that filled the small kitchen space. The steam rising from the pot carried hints of earth and wood, gently inviting those nearby to slow their breath and prepare for rest. As the broth simmered, the household would move into a quieter state. Tasks were finished or set aside as everyone anticipated the warmth and comfort the drink would bring. The flickering light from the hearth cast soft shadows, while the warmth radiated gently from the cooking vessel. The steady bubbling of the broth was a soft background sound, steady and reassuring in the growing dusk. The preparation was simple. Herbs were rinsed, if needed, torn or crushed lightly by hand to release their essence before being added. Sometimes roots or small bits of dried vegetables were included for texture and additional nutrition. The mixture was left to simmer long enough to extract flavors without becoming bitter. Occasional stirring with a wooden spoon kept the herbs gently moving, while careful attention ensured the fire did not burn too hot or die down too low. When the broth was ready, it was ladled into wooden or clay cups, chosen for their ability to hold heat without burning the hands. The warmth of the broth was immediately felt, a comforting contrast to the chill of the day's end. People gathered quietly, holding their cups carefully, feeling the gentle heat radiate into their palms. The first sips were slow, allowing the warmth to spread through the mouth and down the throat, soothing and softening. The taste was mild, but rich with earthy notes. The herbal flavors were subtle, never overpowering. There was a slight bitterness in some cups, balanced by the natural sweetness of dried vegetables or the smoky undertones from the hearth. Drinking the broth encouraged slow breathing, as if the body relaxed with each swallow. The warmth helped loosen muscles stiffened by cold and quieted the mind after a day of work and vigilance. For children and the elderly, The broth offered gentle nourishment and comfort. Even those who might not have eaten much during the day found the warm liquid easy to swallow. It was a ritual that gathered the family around the fire, providing a moment of calm connection and shared care. The sound of soft sipping mingled with the crackle of embers, creating a peaceful atmosphere. In homes where meat was scarce, the broth's simplicity was essential. It was not a rich stew, but a light, sustaining drink that helped keep the body fueled through long winter nights. Sometimes small scraps of bone or dried meat were simmered alongside herbs to enrich the broth with additional flavor and protein. These additions were rare and used sparingly, reserved for times of need or special occasions. The ritual of drinking broth also served as a cue to prepare for rest. As the last drops were savored, people began their final tasks before bed, checking fires, adjusting blankets, and settling into quiet spaces. The warmth from the broth lingered, helping to carry body temperature gently upward as night's coolness pressed in. This slow transition from activity to rest was a key part of enduring the cold season. Herbal broth also had subtle healing properties. Some herbs used were believed to ease minor ailments, reduce inflammation, or promote restful sleep. This knowledge was passed down quietly, often without words but through practice. The warmth and moisture of the broth helped soothe dry throats and calm coughs, common during cold months. Preparing broth required only basic tools and ingredients, but demanded patience and attention. Fire management was important. Too high a flame could boil off delicate oils and flavors. Too low, and the herbs would not release their properties fully. Stirring was gentle, rhythmic, a calming motion repeated nightly. The careful tending of the pot was as much about maintaining a peaceful mood as it was about cooking. The entire process, from drawing water to drinking the final cup, was an act of mindful care. It connected people to the natural world through herbs and water, and to each other through shared ritual. The quiet focus on warmth, nourishment, and simple ingredients created a space for calm and restfulness to grow as daylight faded. Even after the broth was finished, the pot remained near the hearth, sometimes filled with warm water for washing or softened herbs for other uses. The warmth from the pot radiated softly into the room, a lingering presence of care and routine. This gentle heat contrasted with the cold outside, offering a tangible reminder that warmth could be created and preserved. In many ways, the nightly herbal broth was a symbol of endurance. It was a humble comfort, a source of strength, and a quiet promise of care. As the fire dimmed and the house grew still, the warmth from the broth traveled through bodies and minds, easing the transition towards sleep and rest. The day's efforts culminated in this small cup of warmth, a daily gift against the cold. Through seasons of frost and snow, the steady preparation and drinking of herbal broth remained constant. It was one of the simple, sustaining practices that helped medieval people survive harsh winters. The quiet heat of broth held not only physical warmth, but also a calmness that softened the edges of long, cold nights. It was a gentle companion in the dark, guiding bodies toward rest and resilience. Chapter 11. Depict forming small work groups for shared warmth. In the long and biting winters of medieval times, warmth was something to be sought, not only from fires and clothing, but also from the presence of others. Forming small work groups was a practical way to share body heat while carrying out daily tasks that could not be delayed. Even as the cold pressed in, these gatherings brought people together, moving slowly through their work with a quiet understanding that together they could create a small island of warmth amid the chill. Work groups were often made up of family members or neighbors, clustered in a few close quarters within the home or nearby outbuildings. The spaces were limited, sometimes little more than a corner near the hearth or a cramped workshop where tools and supplies were kept. The closeness of bodies in these spaces helped hold heat, the shared breath and gentle movements, making the air feel softer and less biting. Conversations were kept low and measured to maintain the calm atmosphere needed for focus and rest. People took care in positioning themselves to maximize the benefit of shared warmth, sitting or standing close, but without crowding. They arranged themselves so that body heat could circulate. Hands and feet sometimes touched or leaned against each other, adding to the flow of warmth. Movement was slow and deliberate, each motion producing a quiet rustle of clothing or the faint scrape of tools against wood or metal. In these small groups, tasks were often divided carefully to avoid unnecessary exertion that might cause sweating and subsequent cooling. One person might hold materials steady while another carved or shaped, their coordinated movements steady and precise. The rhythm of work was unhurried, allowing warmth to build gradually. Occasionally someone would pause to stretch or shift position, mindful of keeping muscles loose and circulation steady. The quiet murmur of voices added to the atmosphere, gentle enough not to disturb the calm, but present as a reminder of human connection. Words were exchanged softly, often about the task at hand, or observations about the weather. These small exchanges carried no urgency but offered companionship and distraction from the cold. The tone was steady, unexcited, creating a soothing background to the physical work. Light from the hearth or simple lamps flickered across faces and hands, casting soft shadows that moved slowly as people worked. The warmth from the fire mingled with body heat, creating pockets of comfort. People occasionally reached toward the fire to warm their hands before returning to their work. The scent of smoke, mixed with leather, wood and earth, filled the air gently, grounding the senses in the present moment. In some cases, work groups gathered to prepare food or mend clothing. These shared tasks were essential for survival and required patience and care. Mending required close attention to threads and fabric, slow and careful movements that avoided sudden jerks or strain. Preparing food might involve cutting vegetables or stirring thick stews, each action deliberate and measured to conserve energy and maintain warmth. The presence of others also provided psychological comfort during the long cold months. The shared experience of working side by side helped ease the loneliness that could accompany isolation in winter. Even in silence, the awareness of others nearby brought a sense of security. The quiet breathing, the soft shifting of bodies, and the occasional glance or nod communicated a steady support. Children sometimes joined these small groups, watching quietly or taking on simple tasks. Their movements were gentler and slower, carefully observed by adults who ensured they remained warm and safe. The inclusion of young ones reinforced bonds and passed on skills necessary for future seasons. The quiet focus and calm atmosphere helped children settle into a restful mood even as they learned. Groups also gathered to prepare fuel for the hearth. Chopping wood into smaller pieces or stacking logs was done methodically, the sounds muted by layers of clothing and thick boots. The repetitive motions provided a gentle rhythm, helping hands stay warm through movement. Occasionally, a log was passed from one person to another with a soft grunt or word of encouragement. When weather kept people indoors for long stretches, these small clusters became essential to maintaining warmth and morale. Sitting close to each other while spinning wool or weaving baskets brought added heat. The slow twisting and pulling of fibers was accompanied by soft murmurs and the occasional exchange of simple stories or observations. The pace was unhurried, allowing bodies to conserve heat and minds to drift toward calm. Occasionally work groups paused to rest briefly near the fire, stretching limbs and taking sips of warm water or herbal drinks. These moments were quiet and reflective, the firelight steady and unchanging. The heat absorbed slowly into tired muscles and chilled skin. After rest, work resumed with the same gentle pace, each person mindful of maintaining warmth without overexertion. The arrangement of work groups sometimes shifted based on tasks or changing needs. People moved quietly from one spot to another, carrying tools or materials with care. The soft steps and careful handling of objects ensured that noise was minimized, preserving a calm environment. The focus remained on gentle, steady progress rather than speed or intensity. These small gatherings, often included older members of the community who shared knowledge and skills. Their presence was calming and steadying, guiding hands and offering quiet advice. Their experience helped keep the group balanced and mindful, reinforcing the importance of measured effort and careful attention to warmth. Despite the chill outside, the presence of others created a small warmth that was more than physical. The simple act of working side by side, breathing the same air, and moving in quiet coordination was a kind of comfort that softened the harshness of winter. It was a reminder that even in cold, people were not alone. As the day wore on and tasks were completed, the work groups slowly dispersed. People moved to warmer parts of the home or settled near the hearth to rest. The shared warmth lingered in the air, a subtle glow that carried into the evening. The sense of connection and care remained, wrapping around those who had worked together, helping bodies to retain heat and minds to find peace. Through the long winters, forming small work groups was a practical and quiet strategy for enduring cold. It was a way to combine strength, conserve energy, and share the simple but vital gift of warmth. This steady companionship, woven into daily life, helped carry people through the dark months with calm endurance and gentle care. Chapter 12. Summarize: storing dried reeds inside walls for insulation. In the effort to protect their homes from the biting cold of medieval winters, people relied on simple natural materials that could be gathered from the surrounding environment. One such material was dried reeds, which were carefully harvested, dried, and then stored within the walls of houses to serve as insulation. This quiet practice, often unnoticed but deeply effective, provided an additional layer of protection against the harsh wind and frost that swept across villages during the coldest months. The use of reeds for insulation reflected a subtle but important understanding of how to maintain warmth in the absence of modern technology. Reeds were harvested from nearby marshes, riverbanks, or wet meadows during the warmer months when the stalks were mature, but still pliable. Using simple tools, people cut bundles of reeds close to the ground, careful not to damage the surrounding plants. The cut reeds were then tied into sheaves and left to dry under the sun for several days. This drying process was essential to ensure the reeds became stiff, light, and resistant to moisture, qualities that made them useful as insulating material. Once dried, the reeds were gathered and transported back to the village. Their lightness made carrying manageable, though it often required several trips to move enough material to fill the spaces within house walls. The smell of dried reeds was faint, but carried the subtle aroma of earth and fresh water, a gentle reminder of the natural world just beyond the home. The bundles rustled softly as they were handled, a quiet sound that mingled with the everyday noises of village life. Inside the homes, walls were often constructed using a framework of timber or wattle, a lattice of woven branches. This structure left small cavities that could be filled with insulating materials. The dried reeds were carefully inserted into these gaps, layered densely to minimize airflow and trap heat. Workers pressed the reeds firmly but gently into place, ensuring that no gaps remained where cold drafts could slip through. This layering required patience and attention, as even small holes could reduce the overall effectiveness of the insulation. The texture of the reeds, rough and fibrous, provided a natural barrier that slowed the transfer of cold air from outside. Their stiffness helped maintain the shape and thickness of the insulating layer, even as walls settled or shifted with time. The reeds also absorbed moisture from the air, preventing dampness from seeping into the interior spaces. This moisture control was vital to maintaining a dry and warm environment, as wet walls could chill the air and invite mold. In addition to filling the walls, bundles of reeds were sometimes placed under floorboards or in attic spaces. This practice created multiple layers of insulation throughout the structure, helping to keep warmth contained within living areas. The combined effect of these layers was a noticeable difference in temperature between the inside and outside of the house, making daily life more comfortable despite the harsh conditions. The presence of reeds in the walls was not visible once plaster or clay was applied over the framework. These finishing layers were smoothed carefully, sealing the insulating material inside. The walls appeared solid and uniform, giving a sense of security and shelter. The thickness provided by the reeds added to the sturdiness of the structure, making it more resistant to wind and cold. Maintenance of reed insulation was a slow but necessary task. Over time, some settling occurred as the materials compressed or shifted. Families checked walls periodically, particularly before the onset of winter, to identify any weak spots or gaps. Repairs were made by adding fresh reeds where needed or tightening the framework. These actions were performed quietly and methodically, often as part of seasonal preparations for colder weather. The use of reeds was complemented by other natural materials such as straw, moss, or animal hair, which could be layered alongside to enhance insulation. Each material brought different qualities, and their combination created a more effective barrier against the cold. This blending of resources reflected a deep knowledge of the environment and a careful adaptation to the challenges of living without modern conveniences. Reeds were also valued for their sustainability. Harvesting was done with respect to the natural cycle, ensuring that reed beds were not depleted and could regenerate each year. This balance was crucial for communities that relied on local resources for survival. The cycle of cutting, drying, storing, and replacing reeds was part of a larger pattern of care for both home and land. In colder regions, the practice of storing reeds in walls was especially important. The thickness of insulating layers could vary depending on available materials and local traditions. In some cases, walls were built wider specifically to accommodate larger quantities of reeds, creating homes that retained heat more effectively. These structures stood as quiet defenses against winter's chill. The sound of wind against reed-insulated walls was muted compared to that against bare timber or stone. This softening of outside noises contributed to the sense of refuge within the home. The thick walls absorbed and dampened the howl of storms, creating a stillness that encouraged rest and calm. Within the household, the knowledge of how to manage reed insulation was passed down through generations. Older members taught younger ones how to prepare and maintain the materials, sharing skills without hurry or pressure. This transmission of knowledge ensured that the practice continued steadily, helping families endure season after season. The presence of reeds also affected the interior atmosphere subtly. Walls retained warmth longer after the fire had died down, allowing rooms to cool slowly. This gradual change in temperature made it easier for bodies to adjust during sleep or rest. The comfort provided by insulated walls was felt in the quiet moments of the day, when stillness filled the space. Overall, storing dried reeds inside walls was a simple but essential method for medieval people to protect their homes from winter's cold. It required care, patience, and respect for natural cycles, combining practical knowledge with an intimate connection to the environment. This technique offered a gentle, natural way to create warmth and shelter without the need for complex tools or technology. Through this quiet practice, homes became havens against the frost, places where families could gather and rest with a little more comfort. The reeds, though humble and unassuming, played a vital role in survival. Their presence, hidden within walls, was a testament to human ingenuity and adaptation in the face of relentless cold. Chapter 13. Reveal wearing layered linen shirts under wool garments. In the cold and often unforgiving winters of medieval times, the art of dressing was a crucial part of staying warm and comfortable throughout long days and nights. One of the most reliable methods to maintain body heat was the practice of wearing multiple layers of clothing, beginning with linen shirts worn close to the skin and topped with thicker wool garments. This simple system, though unadorned and practical, provided a steady and effective barrier against the chill, combining the natural qualities of different fabrics in a way that worked quietly but powerfully. Linen, made from the flax plant, was soft and smooth against the skin, serving as the first layer of clothing for most people. It was lightweight but durable, allowing the skin to breathe while providing a modest amount of insulation. The linen shirts were usually loose-fitting, enabling air to circulate gently between the fabric and the body. This layer was important because it helped manage moisture by absorbing sweat and moving it away from the skin, reducing the risk of chilling from dampness. The linen shirts were simple in design, often cut with long sleeves and reaching down to mid-thigh or the knees. The fabric had a natural pale color, sometimes dyed lightly, depending on resources, but mostly it remained plain and unassuming. These shirts were carefully sewn with basic stitches, designed to last through frequent washing and wear. The hems and cuffs were neat but not decorative, emphasizing function over form. Over the linen, heavier wool garments were added as a second layer. Wool, sheared from sheep and sometimes blended with other fibers, was thicker and coarser than linen, but excelled at trapping heat. The texture was rougher against the skin, which made the linen underneath all the more valuable for comfort. Wool's natural crimp and linolenic content allowed it to hold air close to the body, creating effective insulation even when damp. This quality made wool essential for winter clothing. Woolen tunics, cloaks or coats were common choices for the outer layer. These were tailored to fit more snugly than the linen shirts, yet still loose enough to allow freedom of movement. The garments covered most of the body, often extending below the waist to shield legs from cold drafts. Sleeves were long and sometimes widened at the ends to accommodate the layered clothing underneath. Wool garments might include hoods or collars to protect the neck and head from the wind. Dressing in these layers was a deliberate process, especially during colder months. Putting on the linen shirt first was a quiet ritual, with careful adjustment to avoid wrinkles or bunching that could cause discomfort. Once the linen was settled, the wool garment was pulled over, sometimes with the help of another person to ease the tight fit. The layering required patience, as tight or uneven clothing could restrict circulation or trap cold air pockets. The layered system extended beyond just shirts and tunics. Additional pieces, such as waistcoats or vests made of wool or felt, were sometimes worn between the two layers for extra warmth. These intermediate layers were less common, but valuable during the coldest days or nights. Scarves and neck wraps made from wool added further protection around vulnerable areas, while gloves and caps completed the ensemble. This approach to clothing was practical and sustainable. Linen and wool were materials readily available to most households, often produced by the family or local community. Flax was cultivated and processed to make linen, while sheep were raised for their wool. Spinning, weaving, and sewing were everyday tasks that supported clothing needs. The skills involved were passed down quietly and steadily, forming a link between generations. The choice of layers also reflected a balance between warmth and mobility. Too many heavy garments could weigh down movement and cause overheating during physical labor. Too few layers risked exposure to cold and sickness. Through experience, people learned how to adjust the number and thickness of layers depending on the weather and activity level. This constant adaptation was part of daily life, influencing how people dressed from morning to night. Wearing layered linen and wool also had effects on hygiene and comfort. Linen's breathability helped reduce skin irritation and kept the body drier, while wool's moisture-wicking properties protected against cold drafts. Together, the fabrics formed a system that managed temperature and moisture quietly and efficiently. This combination was particularly important in a time when bathing was less frequent and dry skin could be easily irritated by rough materials. The layering system extended to children and the elderly as well. Small linen shirts and woolen coats were made to fit the young and fragile bodies of children, with extra care taken to ensure warmth without restricting movement. Older people often wore more layers or heavier wool to compensate for weaker circulation. This simple strategy of layered clothing was an essential part of community health during winter. The visual effect of layered linen under wool was modest. Most garments were undyed or naturally colored in soft browns, grays, and off-whites. Decoration was minimal, focusing instead on sturdiness and practicality. This plainness reflected a life centered on survival and function, rather than fashion. The clothes carried the marks of use, softened and shaped by time and repeated wear. Clothing maintenance was also important in preserving the effectiveness of layers. Linen shirts were washed regularly and hung to dry carefully, often outside in sunlight to prevent mildew. Wool garments were brushed and aired to remove dirt and moisture, but washed less frequently to avoid damage. Repairs were made promptly, with patches or restitching to extend the life of each piece. The layered system was not limited to cold seasons alone, but became vital during winter, when temperatures dropped sharply. This method allowed people to regulate their comfort by adding or removing layers as needed. The ease of adjustment made it possible to maintain warmth without excessive sweating or discomfort, a balance critical to health. Throughout the day, people were mindful of their clothing's condition. Buttons, ties, or belts were adjusted to prevent drafts. Loose edges were tucked in to keep warmth close. The tactile feel of linen against the skin was soft and cooling during activity, while the wool's weight and texture provided steady comfort. These sensations became familiar and reassuring, part of the routine of daily life. Wearing linen under wool was more than just a habit. It was a practical solution, born from experience and necessity. This layering system embodied a deep understanding of how to work with available materials and climate conditions. It was a quiet form of resilience, supporting survival through long, cold winters without modern conveniences. This approach to clothing provided not only physical warmth, but also a subtle sense of security. The layers formed a gentle barrier between the body and the harshness of the outside world. In this way, the simple combination of linen shirts beneath wool garments offered protection, comfort, and endurance in a time when these qualities were essential to life. Chapter 14 shows seeking shelter in underground cellar during storms. In times when winter storms swept across the land with relentless force, medieval people sought refuge in places that could offer shelter from the harsh winds and driving rain. One of the safest havens during these turbulent moments was the underground cellar, a quiet refuge built below the main living spaces. These cellars were simple but effective shelters, providing protection not only from the elements, but also from the biting cold that could penetrate walls and roofs during fierce weather. The cellar was often dug into the earth beneath or beside the house, carefully constructed to resist flooding, while remaining dry and cool. Its walls were thick and sturdy, sometimes lined with stone or packed earth to provide structural support. The air inside was cool, but stable, less subject to sudden changes than the rooms above. This steady atmosphere made the cellar a place where bodies could find respite from the shifting temperatures outside. Access to the cellar was usually through a small door or hatch in the floor or an exterior wall, often shielded by a simple wooden covering. The entrance was low and narrow, designed to keep out drafts and water. Carrying lamps or torches, people moved cautiously down the steps into the dim space, the soft echo of footsteps mingling with the faint drip of moisture from the walls. The smell of damp earth and aged wood filled the air quietly. Inside the cellar, space was limited, but enough for small groups to gather close. The floor was usually packed earth or stone, sometimes covered with straw or rushes, to add a layer of insulation and softness. The walls absorbed the faint light from lamps, casting long shadows that flickered gently. The quiet here was different from the noisy storm above, a deep stillness broken only by the occasional creak of timber or distant wind. Seeking shelter in the cellar was a deliberate act, often done when the weather turned suddenly harsh. Families or neighbors moved quickly to descend, bringing with them small belongings or provisions needed to stay through the storm. The movement was careful and slow, mindful of the limited light and space. Once gathered, people settled into the cool darkness, finding places to sit or lean against the sturdy walls. The coolness of the cellar was a contrast to the chill and wetness outside, but it was not unpleasant. Without the direct blast of wind or rain, the air felt calm and consistent. This stable environment helped prevent the body from losing heat rapidly, a key factor in surviving long, stormy nights. The presence of others added warmth and comfort, soft breathing, and low murmurs, filling the space with a gentle sense of togetherness. The cellar served as a safe pause during storms when outdoor movement was dangerous or impossible. It was a place to wait out the worst weather, protected from falling branches, flying debris, and flooding. The sturdy structure of the cellar kept out much of the noise, allowing minds to rest even as the storm raged above. This separation from chaos created a small pocket of peace. Though the cellar was mostly used for shelter, it sometimes stored food, tools, or firewood, items essential for enduring cold seasons. These stored goods were arranged carefully to avoid clutter, maintaining a clear space for those seeking refuge. The smell of dried herbs or stored root vegetables mingled faintly with the earthiness, adding a muted warmth to the atmosphere. Light was provided by simple oil lamps or candles, their flames flickering softly and casting a golden glow that pushed back shadows without harshness. The lamps were placed on low shelves or hung from hooks, arranged to avoid smoke buildup. The gentle light helped maintain calm, making it easier to rest or pass time during long hours underground. Sounds within the cellar were subdued but familiar. The quiet shifting of feet, the soft rustle of clothing, and the occasional whisper were all part of the environment. Outside, the storm might howl and batter against the earth, but inside the cellar, these noises were muffled to a distant roar. The contrast reinforced the cellar's role as a sanctuary. People used this time in the cellar, not only for safety, but also for quiet reflection and connection. The stillness encouraged calm breathing and slow movements. Conversations were rare, but when they occurred, they were low and steady, sharing observations or gentle reassurances. The collective presence helped soothe anxieties brought on by the storm's fury. Children were kept close, often held or seated beside adults. The cool air was softened by the warmth of bodies pressed together. Small hands were held or stroked, and the gentle rocking of a parent's lap provided comfort. The dark and confined space made the presence of trusted caregivers especially important, anchoring the young ones in security. Waiting in the cellar required patience. The uncertainty of when the storm would pass was met with quiet acceptance. People passed time through silent contemplation or simple tasks such as mending clothing or arranging firewood. The slow pace was necessary, conserving energy and preserving warmth. When the storm finally subsided, movement back to the upper rooms was cautious, but filled with relief. The shift from cool darkness to the faint light of the main house was gradual. Steps were slow and deliberate, mindful of lingering dampness or mud. The return to the hearth meant warmth, light, and the resumption of daily life's rhythms. The cellar's importance extended beyond storms. It was a refuge during other emergencies, and a storage space that contributed to overall household survival. Its quiet presence beneath the home was a steady reminder of the care taken to protect family and property. The knowledge of this safe space offered comfort even when unused. Through harsh seasons and sudden weather changes, the underground cellar stood as a quiet defense against nature's extremes. Its cool, dark interior contrasted with the wildness outside, providing a still place to wait out danger. The simplicity of its design and the natural protection it offered made it an essential part of medieval living. This practice of seeking shelter underground was a practical response to the unpredictability of winter storms. It demonstrated how people adapted their homes and habits to ensure safety. The cellar was not just a physical space, but a sanctuary where warmth could be preserved in the company of others, away from the biting cold and relentless wind. In this way, the cellar served as a gentle guardian through cold and storm, a quiet refuge that held bodies safe and minds calm. Its cool, steady air and the closeness of family or neighbors helped ease the hardship of long winter nights, making survival possible through simple, thoughtful measures. Chapter 15. Uncover children huddling near animal pens for warmth. In the cold, dim world of medieval winters, where warmth was scarce and survival was a quiet struggle, children often found refuge near the animal pens. These small enclosures, filled with the steady warmth of livestock bodies, became unexpected shelters against the biting cold. The gentle heat radiating from the animals created a soft bubble of comfort in the otherwise chilling air, drawing children close to rest and regain warmth in their fragile forms. The animal pens were usually located close to the main living quarters, but separate enough to keep noise and odors at bay. Constructed from rough timber and packed earth, these pens sheltered sheep, goats, pigs, or sometimes cows. The animals huddled together, their bodies pressed closely to conserve heat, their breathing slow and rhythmic. This collective warmth was a natural resource, quietly shared with the small bodies that sought solace nearby. Children, especially the youngest and most vulnerable, instinctively gravitated toward these spots. Their movements were slow and careful as they approached the pens, cloaked in layered garments that offered some protection against the cold. The rough wood of the pen fences was cool to the touch, but less biting than the open air. The ground was often layered with straw, soft underfoot and adding a small cushion against the cold earth. Huddling near the pens, children nestled close to the warmth radiating through the wood. They sometimes leaned gently against the animals or rested their hands on the soft fur. The animals, accustomed to the presence of humans, remained calm and still, their warmth steady and reassuring. The faint sounds of their breathing and the subtle shifting of hooves provided a quiet, steady rhythm that comforted small bodies and minds. The air near the pens was tinged with the earthy scent of straw, fur, and the faint trace of animal breath. This mixture was a sensory backdrop that spoke of life and endurance, grounding children in the present moment, despite the cold and darkness. The muted sounds of the farm beyond were softened here, replaced by the gentle, constant presence of living warmth. Parents and caregivers were aware of this practice, and sometimes guided children toward these spots during the coldest parts of the day or night. The proximity to animals offered a practical solution when indoor heat was limited or when the children needed to be near the outdoors. The pens were familiar places, part of daily life, and therefore safe environments where children could rest without fear. The closeness to the animals also served a protective function. The gentle heat helped prevent chills that could lead to illness, especially in young children whose bodies struggled to regulate temperature. This quiet exchange of warmth was vital in a time when medical care was limited and the cold could quickly become dangerous. Despite the cold, the atmosphere near the pens was not harsh. The animals' steady breathing and warmth created a calm environment that encouraged rest and relaxation. Children's eyes grew heavy in this safe space, their small bodies relaxing as the cold retreated. The soft rustling of straw and the occasional murmur of an animal added to the soothing quiet. Children's clothing, though layered and thick, was often not enough alone to combat the winter chill. Seeking warmth near the pens was a natural extension of their need for comfort. The heat from the animals supplemented the protection offered by wool, linen, and furs, creating a layered effect that helped keep frostbite and shivers at bay. Occasionally, siblings or small groups of children gathered together near the pens. They huddled side by side, sharing body warmth as well as the animal heat. Their breathing mingled in the cold air, soft and synchronized. These quiet gatherings were moments of shared calm, small clusters of warmth against the vast coldness beyond. The practice of staying near animal pens was rooted in the close relationship between people and their livestock. Animals were essential for food, labor, and materials, and their care was intertwined with human survival. The warmth they provided extended beyond their practical uses, offering comfort in the most basic and direct way. Over time, the pens became quiet refuges, places where children could find respite during long days and nights. The small spaces enclosed by wooden slats and filled with the soft sounds of animal life created a microclimate of gentleness amid the harsh winter. This sanctuary, though simple and unadorned, was a vital part of coping with cold and isolation. The smell of hay and animal fur mixed with the cold air, a sensory detail that marked these moments as unique. The tactile feeling of rough wood against skin and the softness of animal coats under small hands created a contrast that comforted. These sensations were part of the rhythm of life, grounding children in the present and easing worries. Parents often checked on the children, their footsteps soft on straw-covered ground. They watched quietly, ensuring the young ones were safe and warm without disturbing the peaceful scene. The care was gentle and unobtrusive, recognizing the natural benefits of this shared warmth. This practice was one among many quiet strategies medieval people used to survive harsh winters. It reflected a deep understanding of how to use the environment and available resources to protect the most vulnerable. The instinct to seek warmth near animals was a simple but effective adaptation that helped preserve life. The warmth from the pens was never excessive, but steady and reassuring. It created a gentle barrier against the cold, one that children could rely on when other sources of heat were scarce. This steady, calm heat helped ease the transition between activity and rest, making sleep more accessible. As nights grew longer and colder, the importance of such refuges increased. The pens remained safe havens where children could recharge and protect themselves against winter's bite. Their quiet presence there was a testament to resilience and the subtle ways people found comfort in difficult times. These moments of closeness between children and animals were small but significant acts of survival. They showed how warmth was not only generated by fire or clothing, but also by the living bodies around them. The steady heat of animals was a silent but essential part of enduring cold seasons. In this way, the practice of huddling near animal pens was more than a necessity. It was a gentle form of connection between humans and the natural world. It offered a soft, calming heat that helped carry children through the long, dark nights. This shared warmth was a quiet lifeline in the harsh landscape of medieval winter. Chapter 16. Demonstrate. Relying on coarse wool caps during cold nights. In the long, cold nights of medieval winters, the simple wool cap was a small but vital guardian against the relentless chill. This humble piece of clothing, often coarse in texture and plainly made, was essential in protecting the head, a part of the body especially vulnerable to cold loss. Wearing these woolen caps was a quiet routine, a deliberate act that helped preserve warmth and provide comfort as darkness deepened. The wool used for these caps was thick and fibrous, harvested from sheep and woven or knitted by hand. Though rough to the touch, the material was effective at trapping heat close to the scalp, preventing the escape of precious body warmth. The texture of the caps could be scratchy, but this was offset by the knowledge that they served a practical and necessary purpose during the harsh cold. These caps came in simple shapes, often rounded to fit snugly over the head and cover the ears. The edges might be rolled or tied to ensure they stayed in place throughout the night. Their design was unadorned, focusing entirely on function rather than decoration. The colors were muted, often natural shades of off-white, gray, or brown, reflecting the unprocessed wool and practical dyeing methods of the time. Putting on a wool cap before nightfall was a quiet, almost ritualistic gesture. People adjusted the cap to sit comfortably, covering as much skin as possible without pinching or causing discomfort. The act was part of preparing for rest, signaling a transition from the busyness of day to the calm of evening. The wool's coarse fibers brushed lightly against skin, a persistent but gentle sensation. The caps help reduce heat loss from the head, which is known to dissipate warmth rapidly if left uncovered. By securing a layer of insulation, they played a critical role in maintaining the body's overall temperature. This simple garment worked quietly but effectively to slow the chilling effect of cold air and drafts that crept through the smallest cracks in timber walls. Even during restless sleep, the caps often stayed in place, held by the natural grip of the wool and the fit of the garment. This constant presence provided ongoing protection throughout the night, shielding the head from cold air that might seep under bedding or through open doors. The awareness of this protection allowed a subtle sense of security, easing worries about the biting cold. The coarse wool cap was sometimes worn not just indoors, but also during brief outdoor movements after dark. Its portability and simplicity made it easy to don quickly, ensuring the head remained covered when stepping outside to check on animals or gather firewood. This small adaptability added to the cap's value as a multi-purpose item of clothing. Children, in particular, were encouraged to wear these caps. As their smaller bodies were less able to retain heat, the caps fit snugly on young heads, sometimes slightly oversized to accommodate growth. For the elderly, the wool caps provided essential warmth, compensating for diminished circulation and sensitivity to cold. This garment became a quiet common thread across ages. The production of wool caps was often a household task, woven or knitted during long winter evenings. Women and sometimes men worked quietly, turning raw wool into practical items that sustained daily life. The process was slow and careful, requiring skill to produce caps that balanced warmth and comfort. This craftsmanship was a form of quiet resilience. Over time, wool caps became associated with the quiet preparations for night. Their presence was a signal that the household was settling in, the day's labors concluded, and rest imminent. The texture and weight of the cap became familiar sensations, woven into the rhythm of life. Wearing one was both a practical measure and a comforting habit. The simple wool cap was often paired with other garments, layered beneath heavier hoods or cloaks for added protection during especially cold nights. Together, these layers formed a system of warmth that adapted to shifting temperatures. The cap served as a base layer for the head, ensuring that the most vulnerable parts of the body remained insulated. The caps were not without their challenges. The coarse wool could cause itching or irritation for some, particularly when worn for long hours. However, the benefits in warmth and protection outweighed the discomfort. The close contact with wool also conditioned the skin gradually, making it more tolerant over time. Washing and maintaining the wool caps was done with care to preserve their insulating properties. Gentle cleaning methods were used to avoid shrinking or felting the wool excessively. Caps were dried slowly near the hearth, their fibers softening and regaining shape. The careful upkeep extended the life of these essential garments. Despite their plain appearance, wool caps held a special place in the household wardrobe. They were often handed down from one family member to another, carrying the marks of time and wear. The familiarity of a worn cap was a small comfort against the vastness of winter's chill, a tangible link to continuity and care. Wearing a wool cap also played a subtle role in health. By preventing rapid heat loss from the head, it helped reduce the risk of colds or illnesses that could arise from prolonged exposure. This protective effect was understood through experience, passed down through quiet advice and observation. The act of putting on the cap was often accompanied by small adjustments, tucking in loose ends, smoothing the fabric over ears, or pulling it lower over the forehead. These motions were slow and deliberate, reinforcing the calming routine of preparing for rest. The familiar weight of the cap helped signal the body to relax. At night, the wool cap worked silently to preserve warmth, its fibers trapping air and creating a steady buffer against the cold. The sensation of the soft, rough fabric close to skin was a constant but gentle presence, part of the quiet landscape of winter rest. It allowed the body to conserve energy and maintain comfort despite outside temperatures. This practical garment, though simple and unassuming, was an indispensable tool in facing the cold. Its effectiveness lay in its straightforward design and the natural qualities of wool. The cap was a quiet testament to human adaptation and care, a small shield against winter's harshness. In this way, the coarse wool cap helped carry people through long nights, preserving warmth and offering comfort in the stillness. It was a silent companion in the darkness, a steady presence that eased the passage from wakefulness to sleep. The humble wool cap was more than just clothing. It was a gentle guardian of warmth and rest. Chapter 17. Expose, storing heated stones under bedding for nightly heat. In the quiet darkness of medieval nights, when cold crept silently through every crack and crevice, people turned to a simple but effective method to bring warmth to their beds: storing heated stones beneath their bedding. This practice was a subtle art of survival, quietly passed down and carefully maintained, providing a gentle, lasting heat through the long hours of night. The stones, once warmed by fire, became silent companions that radiated comfort long after the hearth had cooled. The process began by selecting the right stones, usually smooth and dense rocks that could hold heat without cracking or breaking. These stones were gathered from nearby streams or fields, chosen for their ability to absorb and slowly release warmth. Their surfaces were naturally rough but steady to the touch, offering a tactile reminder of the earth's enduring presence. Before nightfall, the stones were carefully heated in the fire, or placed close to glowing embers. This was done with caution, allowing the stones to warm gradually, without overheating, which could cause damage or risk burns. Once sufficiently heated, the stones were wrapped in cloth, or placed within small sacks, made of linen or wool, to protect skin and bedding from direct contact. Carrying the warm stones to the sleeping area was done gently, mindful of their heat and weight. The stones were nestled beneath layers of straw or rushes that formed the mattress base. The straw provided a soft buffer that spread the heat evenly and prevented direct pressure on the body. This layering created a cozy pocket of warmth that could be felt immediately upon lying down. The gentle radiance from the heated stones created a subtle warmth that persisted through the night. Unlike the sharp heat of a fire, the stones released their energy slowly and steadily. This slow warmth was comforting, encouraging muscles to relax and bodies to settle into rest. The sensation was quiet and consistent, a soft pulse of heat beneath blankets and clothing. This method of warming beds was particularly valuable in homes where hearth fires were small or needed to be kept low to conserve fuel. The stones acted as natural radiators, extending the reach of warmth beyond the immediate vicinity of the fire. Their presence beneath the bedding allowed people to conserve energy and avoid the discomfort of cold surfaces. Placing the stones required a careful balance. Too few stones meant insufficient warmth, while too many could cause discomfort or overheating. The practice involved trial and error, with families learning over time how many stones worked best for their specific beds and needs. This knowledge was shared quietly from one generation to the next, forming part of the fabric of domestic life. The stone's heat also helped reduce moisture accumulation in bedding. Cold beds often felt damp or clammy, but the slow radiating warmth from the stones encouraged evaporation and kept the sleeping area drier. This was an important factor in maintaining comfort and health during cold seasons, when dampness could easily lead to chills. At times, the stones were moved or adjusted during the night to maintain an even distribution of heat. People shifted their positions carefully, feeling for the warmth beneath and making subtle movements to keep comfortable. This ongoing interaction was part of the intimate relationship between body and environment that defined medieval life. The practice extended beyond human beds. Heated stones were sometimes placed in animal stalls or under coverings for livestock, helping protect valuable animals from frostbite or cold stress. This shared use of warmed stones reflected the interconnectedness of human and animal survival strategies during harsh winters. Heating stones also carried a quiet ritualistic aspect. Preparing the stones, warming them by the fire, and placing them beneath the bedding were deliberate acts that marked the transition to night. These routines were slow and methodical, creating a calming atmosphere that prepared bodies and minds for rest. The tactile sensations of warm stones, wrapped in cloth, were part of this soothing preparation. The stones themselves varied in size and shape, from small, rounded pebbles to larger flat slabs. Their surfaces, warmed by fire, retained a faint memory of heat that comforted even as darkness enveloped the room. The subtle contrast between the cool air and the hidden warmth beneath gave a gentle sense of protection. Families often kept specific stones for this purpose, cherished for their heat retention qualities and smooth textures. These stones were sometimes worn smooth over years of use, their edges softened by handling and time. The familiarity of these stones added a layer of emotional comfort, a quiet presence that accompanied nightly rest. During particularly cold spells, heated stones were combined with other warming strategies such as thick wool blankets and layered clothing. Together, these methods formed a comprehensive defense against the penetrating cold. The stones provided a foundational warmth that complemented the insulation of textiles and the residual heat of the hearth. This method was especially important in homes without chimneys or where smoke had to be minimized. Since hearth fires often vented through thatch roofs or open windows, sustaining a fire through the night was challenging. Heated stones allowed people to preserve warmth from the fire's daytime glow without needing constant tending after dark. Care was taken to avoid burns or overheating. Stones were never placed directly on bare skin and were wrapped or cushioned to distribute heat safely. This cautious approach reflected a careful understanding of materials and the limits of human tolerance to heat. The practice balanced warmth with comfort and safety. The sensory experience of sleeping with heated stones was subtle but powerful. The faint heat beneath blankets, the soft weight of the stones cushioned by straw, and the quiet stillness of the room all combined to create a peaceful environment. This gentle warmth helped ease the body's transition into deep, restorative sleep. The use of heated stones was a practical response to the challenges of cold winters, showing ingenuity in the face of limited resources. This quiet adaptation made life more bearable, turning a harsh environment into a space where rest could be found. The stones carried warmth, not only physically but also in the reassurance they provided. Through centuries, this simple technique remained a constant in homes across cold regions. It was a reminder that survival often depended on small, thoughtful actions repeated daily. The heated stones beneath bedding symbolized care, preparation, and resilience in the face of nature's difficulties. In this way, the warmth of stones became an unseen but essential part of medieval winter nights. Their slow heat seeped quietly into the dark, offering comfort and ease. The presence of these stones was a silent promise of warmth that outlasted the fire's flame, carrying people gently through the coldest hours toward rest and renewal. Chapter 18. Characterize monitoring hearth coals to avoid complete extinguishment. In the fragile quiet of a medieval home on a cold winter's night, the glowing hearth coals were more than just embers. They were a vital source of life and warmth that required constant, gentle attention. The slow, steady maintenance of these glowing remnants was a careful task, one carried out with quiet patience and a mindful hand to keep the fire alive through the long hours of darkness. Watching over the dying coals was an act of care that balanced skill and vigilance, ensuring the home did not slip into cold and darkness. The coals, small pieces of wood, transformed by flame into glowing fragments, radiated a soft orange light that flickered with a steady, calming pulse. Their heat was subtle but essential, holding the promise of rekindling flame or providing enough warmth to comfort those nearby. Unlike the roaring fire of earlier in the evening, these coals burned slowly, fading gently, and requiring careful attention to avoid their disappearance. Monitoring these coals was a quiet ritual. People would periodically lean close to the hearth, feeling the gentle warmth radiating from the embers. Their eyes adjusted to the dim glow, scanning for signs of fading heat or ash buildup that might smother the fire. The soft crackle of shifting embers was a reassuring sound. Amid the stillness, a faint whisper that life remained in the hearth. Using simple tools like iron pokers or wooden sticks, they carefully moved the coals to expose hotter parts to the air. This slow, deliberate turning of embers helped to revive their glow and spread heat more evenly. The process required patience, avoiding sudden movements or excessive disturbance that could scatter ashes or extinguish the remaining flame. Adding small pieces of dry wood or kindling was done sparingly, in measured amounts. Too much fuel could overwhelm the fragile coals, while too little left the hearth cooling. Each addition was thoughtful, aimed at supporting a slow, sustained burn rather than a sudden flare. This careful balance was learned through experience and passed down as practical wisdom. The hearth was more than just a source of heat. It was a center of household life. Its warmth extended beyond physical comfort, offering a quiet presence that grounded people during long nights. Maintaining the coals was an act of nurturing, a steady guardianship that helped preserve this vital comfort. The gentle orange glow of the coals softened shadows on rough timber walls, creating a calm, protective atmosphere. Their light was not harsh or distracting, but soothing, allowing eyes to rest while still providing enough visibility to carry out simple tasks. This dim illumination was part of the rhythm of nighttime life, a quiet beacon in the darkness. As the night deepened, the coals continued to change, cooling slowly and shrinking in size. Monitoring them required attentiveness, noticing the subtle shift in color from bright orange to dull red, then to gray ash. This gradual transformation marked the passage of time and the diminishing of warmth, signaling when additional attention or fuel might be needed. In some homes, a small bed of ashes was preserved intentionally beneath the coals. This layer helped insulate heat and provided a foundation for reigniting flames when fuel was added. The ash bed absorbed warmth and released it slowly, contributing to the overall stability of the hearth's temperature. Children often observed these routines with quiet curiosity. The slow dance of coals and ash, the faint sounds of crackling and shifting wood, created a calming backdrop to their evenings. Watching adults tend the fire was part of learning how to live with and respect the natural elements that shaped daily life. The practice of maintaining coals also involved protecting them from drafts or gusts of cold air that could snuff out the fragile heat. Hearths were often shielded by thick curtains or placed strategically within the home to minimize exposure to cold wind. This environmental care complemented the hands-on tending of embers. Sometimes, when coals were well cared for, small sparks would rise gently into the air, momentarily brightening the room. These sparks were brief and delicate, reminding watchers of the potential to rekindle a full fire if needed. The anticipation of such moments added a quiet hopefulness to the vigil over the hearth. In homes where fuel was scarce, conserving coals was especially important. The care taken to preserve and nurture the embers reflected a broader mindfulness about resources and survival. Each glowing coal was a small victory against the harshness of winter's cold and darkness. The physical act of tending coals, reaching out, feeling warmth, carefully shifting embers, was a grounding, tactile experience. It connected people directly with the elemental forces that sustained them. This connection fostered a deep respect for fire's power and fragility, encouraging careful, deliberate actions rather than haste. Maintaining the hearth's warmth was often a shared responsibility. Family members took turns watching over the coals, their quiet presence reinforcing bonds and providing comfort through companionship. The simple act of being near the glowing embers became a shared ritual that marked the passage of time and the unfolding of the night. The sensory experience of monitoring coals was subtle. The faint heat on skin, the quiet crackle, the soft orange glow, and the smell of burning wood and smoke combined to create an environment that soothed the mind. This sensory backdrop supported relaxation and encouraged the body to prepare for rest. Over the centuries, this practice remained largely unchanged, a constant thread in human adaptation to cold climates. The care given to hearth coals was a testament to the quiet endurance and practical wisdom of those who lived through long winters without modern conveniences. The extinguishing of the coals was always approached with care, as complete loss meant a cold house and the laborious task of starting a new fire. This made their preservation through the night a priority, with watchers balancing the needs of warmth and fuel conservation. In this way, the hearth coals were both a physical source of heat and a symbol of steady vigilance. Their slow burn embodied patience and resilience, qualities essential for enduring the cold and darkness of winter nights. The act of tending coals was a gentle, ongoing conversation between people and fire. It required attentiveness, care, and respect for the natural rhythm of flame and ash. This quiet dialogue helped keep homes warm and bodies safe as night deepened. Thus, the monitoring of hearth coals was more than a simple task. It was an enduring practice of survival and comfort. Through the careful tending of these glowing embers, people maintained a fragile warmth that carried them through long, cold nights toward rest and renewal. Chapter 19. Share using animal fats to fuel slow-burning lamps. The gentle flicker of a lamp in the dark was a small but precious light in medieval homes, often fueled by the slow-burning animal fats gathered from daily life. This simple yet effective method provided quiet illumination, extending the reach of warmth and comfort into the night. Using animal fats to fuel lamps was a careful balance of resourcefulness and patience, creating a soft glow that accompanied evening tasks and rest. Animal fats were collected from common domestic sources, such as sheep, cattle, or pigs, extracted carefully after butchering or from natural byproducts. These fats, once rendered and purified, became a valuable commodity for lighting. The process of rendering involved melting and straining the fat to remove impurities, producing a cleaner substance suitable for burning in lamps. The lamps themselves were often made from clay, stone, or metal, simple in design and shaped to hold a pool of fat. A wick, typically made from flax or hemp fibers, was placed carefully within the lamp, partially submerged in the fat to absorb the fuel slowly. This wick drew the fat upward through capillary action, allowing for a steady and controlled burn. Lighting these lamps required a delicate hand. The flame was small and steady, producing a warm golden light that danced softly on walls and ceilings. Unlike larger fires or torches, the lamps did not cast harsh shadows or bright glares, creating a calming ambiance, well suited for quiet evenings and preparation for sleep. The slow burn of animal fat lamps was particularly suited for conserving fuel, as the fat burned longer and more evenly than many other materials. This efficiency was vital during winter months when resources were limited, and every bit of fuel had to be carefully rationed. The lamps provided just enough light to navigate a room or perform simple tasks without draining supplies too quickly. Positioning of the lamps was strategic, often placed on low tables, shelves, or window ledges to maximize illumination while minimizing fire risk. The gentle light illuminated faces, hands, and tools, aiding sewing, weaving, or mending, while supporting a tranquil environment. The warmth from the lamp was subtle, never overwhelming, but contributing a small measure of heat to the surrounding space. The smell of burning animal fat was distinct, earthy and slightly musky, blending with other natural scents of wood, smoke, and damp earth. This aroma became a familiar part of the household atmosphere during long winter nights. For those accustomed to it, the scent offered a quiet reassurance that the home remained alive and cared for in the darkness. Care was taken to maintain the lamps, trimming wicks to prevent smoky or uneven flames. Removing charred or burnt parts of the wick allowed the lamp to burn cleaner and last longer. This maintenance was a slow, deliberate process done with calm focus, part of the evening's quiet routines. Refilling lamps with rendered fat was done carefully to avoid spills or waste. The liquid fat, warm and viscous, was poured slowly into the lamp's reservoir. This replenishing ensured a continuous source of light, sustaining the household through the hours between dusk and dawn. In some homes, lamps fueled by animal fats were supplemented by rushlights, thin strips of dried plant material soaked in fat. These provided additional sources of soft light, but burned faster and less evenly than fat lamps. Together, these sources formed a network of gentle illumination that made night living possible. The flickering light from these lamps created a sense of intimacy within the home. Faces were softly outlined, shadows merged gently with the dim glow, and rooms felt enclosed in a cocoon of warmth and quiet. This atmosphere was conducive to storytelling, reflection, and the easing of the day's labors. Animal fat lamps were also practical outdoors. They were used to light pathways, protect entrances, or mark places of gathering during darker hours. Their steady, reliable glow was preferred in many cases for safety and comfort. The gathering and preparation of animal fats required foresight and planning. Families often stored fats in cool, dry places, preserving them for winter use. This careful management of resources was essential to maintaining light and warmth when daylight hours were short and cold settled in deeply. Burning fat lamps was not without its challenges. The fuel could produce smoke or odors if not properly rendered, or if the wick was too long. Ventilation and placement of lamps took these factors into account to keep living spaces comfortable. Over time, people developed a nuanced understanding of how to balance fuel quality, wick size, and flame height. The use of animal fats for lighting also reflected a broader relationship between people and their environment. Nothing was wasted, and materials were repurposed thoughtfully. The cycle of life and death on farms and villages was interwoven with daily survival practices, including the humble task of lighting lamps. Children often watched these lamps burn with quiet fascination. The gentle dance of flame and the warm glow were soothing companions during bedtime routines. The lamp's light served as a beacon of safety and care, a tangible sign of warmth and human presence in the cold night. The method of using animal fat lamps endured for centuries, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of people living without modern conveniences. It was a simple technology, but vital to extending comfort and safety after dark. In this slow and steady light, families found a rhythm that matched the natural world around them. The lamps marked time passing, evenings unfolding, and nights deepening. Their glow was a soft counterpoint to the cold and darkness outside, a quiet signal of home. Thus, the use of animal fats to fuel slow-burning lamps was both a practical necessity and a source of gentle comfort. It illuminated homes and hearts alike, offering a warm, steady presence that helped ease the long hours of winter darkness toward rest and renewal. Chapter 20 concludes surviving harsh winters through simple shared practices. Surviving the harsh winters of medieval times depended not on grand inventions, but on simple shared practices quietly woven into daily life. These basic routines and traditions, passed down through generations, formed the backbone of endurance when cold and darkness pressed in relentlessly. The collective wisdom of small communities and families shaped a world where survival was a measured, deliberate process, grounded in cooperation and resourcefulness. People lived closely together, sharing warmth and knowledge in ways that strengthened bonds and created a sense of security. There was comfort in this shared experience, a mutual understanding that no one faced the challenges of winter alone. Daily habits, from tending fires to layering clothing, became communal rituals that shaped rhythm and stability amid uncertainty. Homes were constructed with practicality in mind, using materials and designs that optimized insulation and protection from the cold. The simple act of stacking dried reeds inside walls or layering straw beneath beds reflected a deep awareness of the environment's demands. These small choices collectively made homes more livable during the longest nights. Clothing was another essential element, with layers of wool and linen carefully combined to trap heat and shield against biting winds. People adapted their garments not only for function, but for comfort, knowing that warmth was fundamental to health and well-being. These clothing traditions echoed shared values of care and preparedness. Food and drink played a critical role in sustaining energy and warmth. The preparation and consumption of warm herbal broths or stews before nightfall were more than nourishment. They were acts of comfort and renewal. The ritual of gathering around modest meals fostered togetherness and calm amid the harsh conditions. The rhythm of daily life included constant movement and purposeful tasks designed to maintain body heat. Simple activities such as chopping wood, tending animals, or mending clothes ensured circulation and kept lethargy at bay. These small exertions balanced rest and activity in a delicate dance, essential to endurance. Families and neighbors often formed small groups to share heat and support. Sitting close together in the evening, sharing stories or quiet companionship helped preserve warmth and spirit alike. The physical closeness was a form of practical care, a natural response to cold and isolation. Evenings were marked by the careful tending of hearth coals, the slow rotation of embers, and the lighting of lamps, fueled by animal fats. These steady, deliberate acts maintained light and heat while conserving precious resources. The soft glow of lamp flames and the warmth of coals provided a gentle counterpoint to the surrounding chill. Sleeping arrangements reflected the ingenuity of simple solutions. Heated stones placed beneath bedding, layered blankets, and thick straw mattresses created pockets of comfort that extended the warmth of the day into night. These preparations cushioned the body and mind, facilitating restful sleep despite the cold. Children were included in these shared practices, learning through observation and participation. Their close proximity to animal pens or shared beds helped maintain warmth and instilled early lessons in cooperation and resilience. The collective care of the young was a vital thread in the fabric of survival. The passing of knowledge about how to live through winter was both explicit and unspoken. It was conveyed through example, gentle reminders, and the rhythms of daily routine. This wisdom was not written, but lived, a steady inheritance that bound generations together. Attention to detail such as wrapping stones carefully or trimming lamp wicks demonstrated a mindful approach to conserving heat and light. These small tasks were repeated with patience and calm, emphasizing steady endurance over urgency or haste. The steady pace of such work mirrored the slow unfolding of winter itself. Storms and cold snaps called for retreat to safer, insulated spaces like underground cellars. These refuges were shared resources that offered protection and warmth beyond the reach of harsh weather. Their use was coordinated within communities, underscoring the importance of cooperation and planning. The management of fuel and food resources required foresight and discipline. Gathering and storing materials during warmer months ensured that winter needs were met. This cyclical preparation was a cornerstone of survival, linking seasons and shaping long-term habits. Despite the hardships, these practices fostered a quiet strength and endurance. The simplicity of shared routines, combined with careful attention and mutual care, enabled people to navigate the harshest conditions with grace. There was no need for grand solutions. Survival was found in the consistency of small, intentional actions. The slow, measured pace of life during winter encouraged reflection and presence. The soft glow of firelight and the muffled sounds of snow outside created a setting for rest and renewal. In this environment, people found moments of peace amid adversity. Through these modest but essential practices, communities sustained themselves over centuries of cold seasons. The resilience built in these routines laid the foundation for future generations to thrive. The wisdom embedded in shared survival methods is a quiet testament to human adaptability and care. Ultimately, surviving harsh winters was a collective endeavor, grounded in simplicity and connection. The shared experiences of tending fires, layering clothing, and supporting one another created a network of warmth, that extended beyond individual homes. This network was a living web of support and endurance. The lessons of these past winters echo softly in the present, reminding us that sometimes the most effective ways to endure come from steady, shared effort. The quiet rhythms of survival invite us to appreciate the power of small, sustained actions done together. As night falls and the cold deepens, the gentle practices of those before continue to inspire a calm approach to hardship. Their legacy is one of careful preparation, thoughtful care, and a profound understanding of how simple, shared habits can carry us through even the darkest, coldest times.